Jon Snow stood upon the old walls of Castle Black, his cloak snapping in the wind with the same familiar fray it had borne since he first arrived as a boy desperate for a new life. The north's chill always seemed to deepen its sunset, and the sky blazed orange and purple across the horizon. Ghost, his albino dire wolf, padded silently at his side, ears perked, nose twitching its sense beyond Jon's understanding. Even after all this time, standing watch brought Jon a sense of purpose. He was no longer Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, not officially, yet he felt the same responsibility knotting in his stomach as he surveyed the far-off shadows of the landscape. The wilds beyond the wall had been his refuge since his exile, the free folk his kin in spirit if not in blood. But the burdens of leadership and the responsibilities he thought he had shed clung to him still. He often wondered if the realm had simply forgotten him, or if the name Jon Snow still echoed in whisper among the lords and ladies who once shaped destiny from the south. But men's memories were short, or so he had believed. He ran his gloved hand over the stone battlement and thought about the broken kingdoms he had left behind. Yet now there were rumors trickling to him, tales told by travelers and roving bands who crossed the remnants of the great northern barrier that had begun to crumble in places. The rumor that King Bran the Broken had invited him to return. The rumor that the great lords of Westeros, fractious in the aftershock of endless war, were beginning to wonder if the realm could truly stand on its own 2 feet without a figure like Jon Snow to guide it. The rumor that the threat beyond the grave might not be as gone as they'd hoped. That the long night could come again in one form or another. Jon's fingers closed into a fist, his eyes flitting to Ghost. "What do you think, boy?" he murmured. Ghost turned his red-eyed gaze on Jon. "Do we stay or go?" But Ghost merely glanced at the horizon, offering no answer. Jon pressed his lips tight. A letter had arrived earlier that month, delivered by one of the king's sworn messengers who had ridden to the far north to find him. In neat, measured script, Bran the Broken had written, "The realm must be reunited. There is work yet undone. We need you in Winterfell." He had thought not to answer it. His duty was done. He had spared Westeros from one more wave of madness, had done everything in his power to protect both living and dead from each other. He had fought the White Walkers, lost Daenerys, and walked away from the Iron Throne he never wanted in the first place. But the letter had quietly unsettled him, stirring old allegiances like wind over ashes. He thought of Sansa and Arya. He saw their faces clearly each time he closed his eyes. Above all, he wondered how his brother's reign had fared. Whether it truly was the dawn of a new era or simply a respite before the next wave of turmoil. Another figure stepped out onto the ramparts. Tormund Giantsbane, red-haired and broad, face weathered from countless nights sleeping under the open sky. The friend who had stood at Jon's side against the undead. A loyal companion from the free folk. Tormund's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, found Jon in the gloom. "You're quiet tonight," Tormund said, crossing his arms. A playful glint danced in his eyes, but there was concern there too. "More than usual, I'd say." Jon exhaled a breath. "It's the message," he admitted. "Bran wants me back south, or at least in Winterfell. He believes the realm isn't as stable as it seems." Tormund snorted, though not unkindly. "Never is it? South of the wall, they squabble for chairs and hats or crowns and thrones, whatever they call 'em. The realm's never truly peaceful." "And you're thinking of going?" Jon hesitated. "I don't know. I swore an oath to live out my days here after what I did after." He could never quite speak the words of Daenerys' name in a straightforward manner, not without the shadow of sorrow crossing his features. "But this was never my real home, Tormund. I grew up in Winterfell. Half of me is still the boy who wanted to be a ranger of the Night's Watch, wanted the old songs and the old ways. The other half is Targaryen, I suppose, or maybe something else. I'm tired of wanting." Tormund took in Jon's quiet anguish with a thoughtful nod. "We free folk have a saying," he said, "something about always moving forward. There's no going back to old hearths, we just build new ones. But if your brother's king now and he calls you, I'm not the one to tell you not to go. Just make certain it's truly what you want." Jon lifted his gaze to the sky. Night arrived swiftly these days, and though winter had technically passed, the cold was never far. "The realm must be reunited," Jon repeated. "What does that mean for the free folk? For us?" "Hard to say," Tormund said. "We came south when the Night King marched. Some of us stayed. Others moved back north to find what was left. The king in the south, your brother, he's left us well enough alone, from all I've heard. But if you go, maybe we'll follow you. We trust you, Jon Snow. We've always trusted you. Those words should have felt like a comfort, but they settled on Jon like a heavier cloak than the one he wore. He turned away, leaning on the cold stone. I'll decide soon, he said. But I have a feeling. There's something stirring. Something beyond me or you or even the king. The realm might need more than just a strong hand. Or perhaps it needs old alliances. He could not ignore the memory of Drogon's roar, echoing across the ashes of King's Landing. And he knew that somewhere out there, that living symbol of fire and destruction still flew, wounded but alive. Maybe the dragons were not gone after all. In the week that followed, Jon wrestled with his conscience. He recalled the promise that exiled him to the north, serve in the Watch. But the Watch itself barely existed. Fewer than 30 men remained at Castle Black, more an echo of an institution than any real fighting force. If a new threat emerged, they would be ill-suited to repel it. And if the king requested Jon's presence at Winterfell, surely that overshadowed any vow made in the aftermath of war. At length, Jon decided he would heed Bran's summons. If nothing else, he could finally reunite with his family, or what remained of it. His preparations were simple. Most of the free folk had scattered across the true north, living as they always had in small clans and villages. A skeleton group remained near Castle Black, forging a makeshift community with a small band of rangers who had not yet deserted the Watch. When Jon told them his plan, Tormund made his position clear. I'll come with you. The south might be a monstrous pit of vipers, but by the gods, it'll be nice to see how those fancy folk react to me again. He grinned in that wild way that always made Jon smile. Besides, I'll protect you from your southern friends if they get the idea to shackle you again. So with Tormund, Ghost, and a handful of free folk who wished to see the land below the wall, some for the first time in their lives, Jon took his leave. The journey south was not as arduous as it once had been. The snows had receded from the King's Road, though drifts of white and craggy ice occasionally blocked their path. At intervals, they passed small settlements or newly constructed outposts. A few northern bannermen recognized him, but those still wearing black cloaks bowed their heads respectfully. None tried to stop him. As they pressed onward, the countryside gradually shifted, the pine forests giving way to the rolling hills that heralded the approach to Winterfell. In the old days, Jon might have found solace in the quiet beauty, but he was too uneasy to admire it. His dreams were troubled, nightmares of Daenerys burned away in an instant, replaced by memories of ice and swirling darkness. He saw the dead rising again, heard the thunder of wings overhead. But were they the wings of White's creatures or living dragons? Each dawn, he woke with a layer of sweat beneath his furs, dread coiling in his gut. At last, the battlements of Winterfell appeared on the horizon. Jon inhaled, pausing for a moment astride his horse. Tormund and the others halted beside him. Ghost stood at the flank, panting quietly. Winterfell's walls seemed both nostalgic and newly imposing. He could almost see the ghosts of his past self on those ramparts, the boy who felt like a bastard among Starks, the man who left to join the Night's Watch, the king in the north, albeit briefly before the southern wars swallowed him. Now, as the setting sun bathed the fortress in shades of gold, a sense of belonging mingled with deep trepidation. At the gates, the guards recognized him immediately. The tall man leading them doffed his helmet. Lord Snow, he said, inclining his head respectfully. The king has been expecting you. Welcome home. Jon's mouth felt dry. He nodded, returning the greeting with quiet solemnity. As the gates swung open, he noticed the courtyard was busy. Soldiers drilled, stable boys ran with straw baskets, blacksmiths hammered out swords. The air rang with vibrant commotion. So Winterfell was no longer the husk it had been after Ramsay Bolton's siege or the destruction wrought by the dead. It breathed with life and possibility. The sight of Sansa descending the steps was like an arrow of warmth to Jon's heart. He dismounted quickly, scarcely remembering to hand his reins to a stable hand. Tormund hung back, perhaps sensing the reunion was a private moment. Sansa wore a gown of deep gray and white, the Stark sigil embroidered at her breast. Her hair fell in russet waves around her shoulders. Though her face bore lines of care, who didn't have them after so many wars? Her eyes shone with unmistakable happiness. "Jon," she said, her voice catching. He bent his head slightly, unsure what to say, but Sansa swept forward and embraced him. The contact was both fierce and tender. For a moment, Jon felt like a child again, longing for acceptance, for family. He held her in his arms, letting the moment wash over him. "Sansa," he said softly. It's good to see you. She stepped back, eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm glad you answered Bran's call, she said. We weren't certain you would. You seemed determined never to set foot south of the wall again. I thought I was, Jon replied, mustering a small smile. But maybe part of me knew this day would come. He took in the changes. The Winterfell courtyard was crowded with new faces, men and women from across the north, all mingling with what appeared to be envoys from the Vale, the Riverlands, and even beyond. It was a bustling center of governance, far more than he remembered. What's happened since I left? He asked quietly. Much, Sansa answered. But let's not dwell on that here in the yard. Bran wants to speak with you. Arya too, though she comes and goes. She's not one for staying in one place long. She'll be thrilled to see you if she hasn't gone off on another journey before nightfall. Jon's heart leapt a little. He had heard rumor of Arya's explorations beyond the western seas. She had returned to Winterfell, it seemed, but how long she would remain was another question entirely. Then I should speak to him, Jon said. And you can tell me everything. Sansa squeezed his hand. He's in the Great Hall. We can go now if you wish. Jon turned slightly to motion Tormund and the small group of free folk forward. He gave instructions that they should be given quarters in the castle's guest wing. Sansa didn't bat an eye at the arrival of wildlings. She had seen too much to be shocked anymore, and perhaps she knew the free folk were more friend than foe. Then, with a measured step, Jon followed her inside. Winterfell's great hall was as he remembered, long wooden tables, a raised dais at the front, a vaulted ceiling with massive beams. The direwolf banners hung on the walls. But at the end of the room, upon the modest dais, sat Bran Stark. Or rather, King Bran Stark, known as Bran the Broken throughout the realm. His presence was quiet yet potent. He reclined in his wheeled chair, his body cloaked in dark robes lined with warm furs. His eyes, uncanny and distant, fixed on Jon the moment he stepped in. Beside him, in seats that seemed more for counsel than formality, were a handful of advisors. Tyrion Lannister, looking older and wearier, perched on a stool. Samwell Tarly, wearing a maester's chain glinting around his neck, stood close by. A new wave of emotion washed through Jon at the sight of Sam, his oldest friend, who offered a shy, joyful smile. Then there was Brienne of Tarth, tall and imposing, serving as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, if rumor held true. They all fell silent as Jon approached. Bran's eyes seemed to measure him. Jon, the king said in a calm voice. Welcome home. Those words, and the gentle acceptance in them, stirred a pang in Jon's chest. He went to one knee out of respect. Your Grace. Bran's expression did not change. He never much cared for ceremony, nor for any notion that Jon might kneel before him. Stand, he said softly. Jon obliged, rising, feeling slightly self-conscious. Tyrion hopped down from his stool, approaching with arms spread. Jon Snow, Tyrion said, we didn't know if you would come. It's good to see you alive. And well, I hope. Jon managed a nod and a brief smile. And you, Tyrion. Sam took a step forward, grinning from ear to ear, though tears shimmered. You have no idea how good it is to see you again, Sam said in a tremulous voice. There's so much to tell you. Jon clasped Sam's hand, then pulled him into a hug. He didn't care if it wasn't the proper etiquette for addressing the King's Grand Maester or whatever Sam's new station was. This was his friend, and after so many hardships, the bond they shared was stronger than any courtly rule. Sam embraced him back, laughing through tears. When they broke apart, Bran finally spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. You must be wondering why I asked you to come, Jon. I wish to speak plainly. The realm has a chance for a new start, but the unity we forged in the War for the Dawn is fracturing. Already, disagreements among the great houses fester. The Ironborn are demanding autonomy beyond what I've granted, and the southern kingdoms still look upon the north with suspicion. Wounds do not heal swiftly, no matter what we will. And more than that, there are strange reports from the east. Jon frowned. What sort of reports? Ships sighted near Slaver's Bay, bearing a sigil no one recognizes, Bran said. Reavers along the coast. Whispers that something stirs in old Valyria, where no man should wander. And there is the matter of Drogon. Jon's heart clenched. The dragon, Tyrion nodded gravely. He was last seen flying east, carrying— He hesitated, then said quietly, "Carrying the body of Daenerys Targaryen. That was months ago, maybe a year. But now there are sightings again, if rumors are to be believed." A great black shape in the sky near the Dothraki Sea, lighting up the night. A rush of complicated emotion shot through Jon. His memories of Daenerys were fraught with love, betrayal, grief, guilt. That Drogon lived did not surprise him, but that the dragon might be a factor now, so long after the wars, unsettled him deeply. "What does that have to do with the realm?" he asked carefully. Bran's voice remained measured, yet there was a note of warning. "A living dragon is more than a beast, Jon. It's a symbol of power. The last Targaryen queen may be gone, but the dragon endures. If someone were to capture or ally with Drogon, they could sway entire kingdoms. You know the fear and the devotion dragons inspire. If a threat arises from across the sea and Drogon is part of it, we must prepare." Jon exhaled slowly. "And you want me to lead this preparation?" "I want you to unite the realm as only you can," Bran replied quietly. "You have the blood of the dragon, as much as you may despise it. The people of the north and the free folk follow you. The lords respect you. Some revere you. And I see more than that, Jon. I see a path forward that requires both fire and ice. You might say I've glimpsed something in my visions." Jon felt a chill. He remembered the prophecy Melisandre had once spoken, the talk of Azor Ahai reborn, the prince that was promised. None of it had saved Daenerys from her fate. None of it had saved them from heartbreak. He stared at Bran, wondering if his brother was manipulated by some greater cosmic design or if he truly believed in forging a better future. "You ask much," Jon said at last. "I'm not sure the realm will accept me. My past." Tyrion stepped in. "We all have complicated pasts," he said. "But Westeros is at a turning point. King Bran's authority is strong but fragile. And the Northmen, at least, would fight for you without question. Sansa has done wonders stabilizing the north, and Arya has garnered mythic status among the small folk, the wolf girl of the long night. But you, Jon Snow, are the one who commanded both men of the Watch and the free folk. You're the one who bent the knee to Daenerys for the good of the realm, and you're the one who ended her reign when it turned to madness. You've proven you value the realm above your own ambition. That is a quality that people trust." Jon stared at the floor, the ache in his chest returning. "If I do this," he said softly, "it won't be just me. I'll need the free folk. I'll need dragons if we can find them. I'll need the realm's lords to unite behind something bigger than petty rivalries. Otherwise, it'll all collapse again." Bran's gaze seemed to pierce him. "Then do what needs to be done," he said. "You are a Stark and a Targaryen. You can bridge the gap between houses, between peoples. It is a heavy burden, but it is yours to carry should you choose it." The chamber fell silent. Jon felt the eyes of everyone upon him, Sam's hopeful, Tyrion's intent, Sansa's resolute, Brienne's measured, and Bran's distant yet unwavering. Jon could almost hear the whispers of all those who had died to give them this chance. Ned Stark, Robb, Daenerys. Even the Night King, destroyed by Arya's blade, had left a legacy of fear that still lingered in every corner of the living world. "All right," Jon said at length, feeling as though he teetered on a precipice. "I'll do it. I'll try." In the days that followed, word spread through the castle and beyond. Jon Snow was to serve as the king's hand in matters of unification, an emissary not just to the lords of Westeros, but also to the wild folk who still roamed beyond the wall. He would do more than that. He would search out any sign of Drogon or any other living dragon to see whether they might be brought back into the realm's fold. He would gather old allies, stand forth in a great council if needed, and try to mend the fractures in the kingdom. The task felt immense. Yet a strange sense of determination ignited in Jon's heart, a spark he thought had died with Daenerys. He sat with Sansa late in the solar, the faint glow of candlelight reflecting off polished wood. They talked about old memories, the crypts, the gods' wood, the nights as children they had spent dreaming of the future. Her laughter was a balm to him, though it was tinged with sorrow for all that was lost. "I'm proud of you," she told him, her expression earnest. "You've always done what needed to be done, even when it tore you apart. That's the mark of a true king, or a true leader, at least." Jon shook his head. "I'm no king." "No," Sansa agreed. "You're not. But you are my brother. And I would follow you if you asked." That mission struck Jon deeply. He reached out and took her hand. Thank you. I only hope I don't disappoint you again. You never have, she said, and a gentle smile touched her lips. Not truly. Arya arrived the next morning. Jon had just stepped out into the courtyard when she slipped out of the shadows as quiet as a cat. He nearly jumped at the sight of her. She was still so light-footed, so unobtrusive he might not have noticed if Ghost hadn't whined softly. She wore leather breeches and a fitted jerkin, her hair cropped short. The only thing that hadn't changed were her fierce gray eyes, which lit up at the sight of him. Jon, she said, and then she barreled into him, hugging him tight. She smelled of wood smoke and the open sea. He laughed, surprising even himself with how carefree it sounded. You're back, she breathed. I wasn't sure I'd see you again. I wasn't sure either, Jon admitted, pulling back to study her. She looked older, more sure of herself. She'd always been self-assured, but now there was a quiet confidence. It's good to see you, Arya. Sansa said you might be gone again soon. Arya shrugged. I want to see more of this world. But I heard you might be traveling far, too. Rumor says you're going beyond the wall and maybe even across the narrow sea. It's so like you to get all the interesting tasks. A hint of mischief gleamed in her eyes. Jon smirked. Interesting, perhaps. Dangerous, almost certainly. But it has to be done. The realm isn't safe yet, no matter how much we want it to be. Arya's smile faded. It never is. But I have faith you'll do what you must. She tapped the hilt of the dagger at her belt, the very one she had used to kill the Night King. If you need me to slit a throat or two, just say the word. Jon shook his head with affectionate exasperation. I'll remember that. Then he took her hand. Truly, Arya, I'm glad you're here. If there's to be any chance of reuniting the realm, I'll need the strength of every Stark. Her jaw set with unwavering determination. Then I'll help. She glanced up at him. But I can't promise I'll stay in one place too long. That's not who I am. Jon nodded. Nor would I ever ask you to. That night, the high table in Winterfell's great hall hosted a council of sorts. Jon, Bran, Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Sam, Tormund, Brienne, and a few key northern lords who pledged their swords to House Stark. The mood was cautiously optimistic. Ale and wine flowed, though not in excessive quantities. There were hearty stews and roasted game hens served by a bustling staff. Even so, the talk was serious. Tyrion outlined the realm's current political landscape. Dorne had regained some of its old pride and was eyeing greater independence. The Iron Islands, under Yara Greyjoy, were similarly disinclined to blindly accept the king's authority. In the Riverlands, Lord Edmure Tully tried to rule with a gentle hand, but there were constant bandit raids. Meanwhile, across the sea, there were rumors that the Dothraki Khalaisars had split into factions, some returning to the old ways, some seeking to cross the sea once more. And overshadowing everything was the persistent rumor of Drogon's presence. We believe, Bran said in his calm manner, that Drogon has nested somewhere in the ancient lands near Old Valyria. He glanced at Tyrion. Your birds, Lord Hand, have heard these reports, and my own visions are clouded, but I sense that there is great power stirring. Not only Drogon's. A new call might be echoing across Essos. A new leader or foe who could turn the realm's destiny once again. Jon heard Tormund shift restlessly. The wildling warrior was not used to such political talk, and dragons were even farther beyond his realm of experience. But Tormund raised his voice anyway. Dragons are unstoppable in the sky, so we do well to remember that. You want to chase it, you better be sure you've the means to keep it from burning you alive. Tyrion nodded. Yes, exactly. And that's why we need someone with Targaryen blood, someone Drogon might remember. The best chance we have of either taming Drogon or persuading him not to burn us all is Jon. Or perhaps someone else of House Targaryen, but I believe Jon is the last. Jon's shoulders tightened. I doubt Drogon will be pleased to see me again after Daenerys. He cleared his throat. But if that's the path forward, I won't shirk it. There was a beat of silence. Then Sansa said, but we should also consider what uniting the realm truly means. It's not just about dragons and alliances across the sea. We must ensure the North remains loyal, our people have their own wants and grievances. The Southerners must be reassured that we're not trying to place a Targaryen back on the Iron Throne. And the free folk deserve recognition and freedom, not shackles. If we're not careful, we could spark another war rather than unify anything. Bran's voice came soft but decisive. Hence why Jon must reach out to the free folk, earn their trust to come south if needed. He must also negotiate with the Ironborn, Dorne, and any other kingdom that might step away from the crown's protection. My reign is meant to guide, not rule through fear. We will use the North as an example of what can be achieved if we truly accept one another's differences. Sansa looked at Jon. And are you ready for such an undertaking? Jon glanced at Tormund, then back at Sansa. I have to be, he said. We all know what's at stake. We fought the army of the dead. We lost friends and loved ones. If there's even a whisper of a threat that large again, we cannot afford to be divided. I won't let what we suffered be for nothing. He looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn. Sam's face shone with pride. Arya's with fierce resolve. Brienne's with unwavering loyalty. Bran's with that distant knowledge only he possessed. Tormund, arms crossed, grunted his approval. Tyrion wore a faint, knowing smile. And Sansa, she took his hand across the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. Then let us begin, she said. In the weeks that followed, Jon found himself more occupied than ever before. First, he traveled with Tormund and a contingent of loyal knights and wildlings to speak with the heads of each major settlement in the north, ensuring they understood the new goals. Some were skeptical, especially about inviting free folk so freely into northern lands, but Jon's presence and Sansa's endorsement went a long way. Jon also had to secure support from lords who had lost family members to Targaryen dragons in the past or who still carried grudges against the wildlings. He had to promise them that this was about forging a new era, not repeating old atrocities. At the same time, Sansa oversaw improvements in trade routes, reopened old roads that once connected the north to the riverlands, and negotiated with the Vale. She leveraged alliances carefully, using her keen intellect and the relationships the Starks had built over generations. Arya came and went unpredictably, sometimes off on errands no one quite understood. Tyrion joked that she was the realm's quiet blade, ensuring trouble did not bloom into calamity. Sam spent hours in the library, researching any lore about dragons, about how Valyrians once bred or controlled them, about potential dragon lairs lost to time. In the evenings, Jon and Sam pored over old tomes, their heads bent together in the flickering candlelight, trying to glean any secret that might help them with Drogon. One late evening, after yet another fruitless search through the histories, Sam rubbed his temples. All the old books say dragons can't truly be tamed. Even the Targaryens only formed a bond, not absolute control, and that bond was often tenuous. The dragons are as intelligent as we are. Some say more so, and it's trust that binds them, not whips and chains. Jon sighed, staring at a depiction of a Valyrian dragon lord in a cracked, ancient manuscript. Drogon trusted Daenerys, he said softly. And look what happened. That bond ended in tragedy. If we confront him, will he view me as her betrayer? Sam's face twisted with sympathy. We can't be certain, but perhaps if dragons sense lineage, he'll still see you as part of his kin. You rode regal once, that's no small thing. Maybe Drogon will sense that connection, too. Jon closed the book, exhausted. I hope you're right, Sam, because if you're wrong. He shook his head. The realm could burn. A month after Jon had arrived in Winterfell, it was decided. A council of the major kingdoms would convene at Moat Cailin, the ancient fortress in the neck, halfway between north and south. There, the realm's lords and ladies would gather to discuss the new alliances, the potential threat from across the sea, and the question of the free folks' place in the realm. It was an audacious plan. Tyrion insisted that meeting on neutral ground would help quell old tensions. And besides, he quipped, Moat Cailin could use a bit of excitement. The ruins been too lonely these last centuries. So the traveling court set forth from Winterfell. Bran remained behind for now, though he promised to join in due time. Instead, Sansa, Tyrion, and Sam accompanied Jon. Alongside them rode Tormund and a band of free folk, ghosts from the vantage of the southern lords. Hundreds of soldiers and knights also rode in attendance, the retinue forming a grand, if unorthodox, procession. Banners of House Stark fluttered alongside the plain hides of the wildlings. The roads were lined in some places by curious small folk, glimpsing for the first time the impossible sight of once-enemy peoples traveling together. Children gawked at Tormund's fiery beard. Tormund laughed and waved as if he were in a parade. When they reached Moat Cailin's crumbling towers, Sansa and Tyrion's staff set about making the fortress habitable for the large gathering. Repair crews had been at work for weeks beforehand, patching walls and clearing debris, ensuring that some measure of comfort could be found in the old stone halls. Even so, the place was damp, drafty, and smelled of marsh. Yet it served as a symbolic midpoint between the north and the rest of Westeros. The watchers on the towers announced the approach of guests each day, first some loyal northern bannermen, then the Lord of the Vale, then lords from the Riverlands. The visitors gaped at the presence of so many free folk. Among the earlier arrivals was Bran, now Lord of Highgarden, who strolled in with a swagger wearing a cloak of green and gold. He greeted Tyrion with a sly grin. Well, if it isn't the imp-turned hand of the king. And Jon Snow, the hero of the long night. Thought you'd be taller. He winked, then nodded to Tormund. Heard you wildlings fought like devils against the dead. Suppose I owe you a thank you or at least a mug of ale. Tormund sniffed. It'll take more than a mug to pay us back for that. Got any cows? We're starving. Bronn barked a laugh, then turned to Tyrion, who rolled his eyes. Next to arrive were the representatives from Dorne, led by a tall, dark-eyed woman with a proud bearing named Lady Nymella Santagar. She carried a polite but distant air, not quite trusting of northern hospitality. Then came Yara Greyjoy from the Iron Islands, her hair cut short, clad in practical leathers, a perpetual scowl on her lips. She glared openly at the wildlings. Are these the ones that nearly butchered our men in the War for the Dawn? Tormund crossed his arms. Only the ones who got in our way, he said with a wolfish grin. Yara snorted. At least I can respect a warrior. I don't fancy being stuck in the swamp, though. Let's get on with it. The lines were drawn, metaphorically if not physically. The lords and ladies approached one another with caution, old grudges seething beneath the surface. Some recognized Jon Snow as their rightful king in the north, others saw him as the Targaryen usurper's lover, and still others hailed him as the realm's savior. The air thrummed with tension. Sansa and Tyrion worked tirelessly, greeting each delegation, assuring them of King Bran's fairness and the need for unity. Sam was almost frantic in his attempts to be hospitable, organizing dinners, lodging, and gatherings to help break the ice. Yet the underlying friction remained. One evening, a fierce argument broke out in the courtyard between a northern lord and a representative from Dorne. Each blamed the other's region for some slight centuries past. Voices rose. Tormund watched from a corner, ready to intervene if weapons were drawn. Jon arrived, stepping between them with a firm but calm presence. He reminded them that the real threats did not care whether one was Dornish or northern. He spoke of the White Walkers, of the countless dead that nearly wiped out all life. By the time he finished, both men were subdued, chastened by the knowledge that they were bickering over trifles in the face of so much danger. Yet Jon suspected that more arguments would erupt if something wasn't done to unify them around a tangible cause. He knew the cause might be the looming threat across the sea, the rumored fleets, the possible reemergence of a dragon-led power. But so far, it was only rumor. Men needed something immediate, something to stir their hearts. And so he decided upon a bold move. On the third day of the council, with everyone gathered in the partially restored Great Hall of Moat Cailin, Jon stood before them and made an announcement. You have come here to discuss the future of Westeros and the shape of our alliances, he began in a strong, clear voice that carried despite the echo of the old walls. But talk is not enough. We must act. We must show that we will stand together if another threat arises, be it from dragons, invaders, or the very dead themselves. He paused, letting his gaze pass from face to face, from Yara's stern frown to Lady Nymella's guarded eyes, from the northern lords who trusted him to the Stormlander envoys who still questioned him. Our king, Bran Stark, is not here yet, but he sends his blessing for what I propose. I will travel east across the narrow sea to seek out Drogon if indeed he lives and to discover if any other power in Essos plans to challenge us. I'll go in peace, offering the hand of friendship to any who wish to trade or negotiate. But if I find a threat, I'll return with warning. And if I can, I will bring the dragon back into the fold, so that Westeros need not fear an enemy that wields fire while we are left with nothing but swords. The hall erupted in murmurs. Lords exchanged glances of disbelief, some shaking their heads. Others looked intrigued or impressed by Jon's audacity. He raised a hand for silence. I know many of you mistrust dragons, he continued. I understand that. I also know that the North does not yearn to welcome more Targaryen rule. I am not here to crown myself or to subjugate anyone. I go as an emissary of our king, and also as a Stark of Winterfell, and as a man who once carried the blood of House Targaryen. Let that be enough to open the door. An uneasy hush fell. Then Tyrion cleared his throat. "Lord Snow speaks truly," he said. "We will do more than speak. We must prove our unity. That means that while Jon is away, the rest of us must work in tandem to ensure the peace. If one region is threatened, all must come to its aid. This was the spirit that allowed us to survive the long night. Let it guide us again." Someone in the crowd, an older lord from the Reach, called out, "And what of the free folk? Why do we need to worry about them? They have their lands beyond the wall. Let them stay there." Tormund stiffened, but Jon spoke first. "The free folk are part of this realm now," he said firmly. "They bled for us against the Night King. They are not our enemies, nor are they children in need of coddling. They will have a voice in these matters. If I return with word of an external threat, we will call upon them as we call upon every kingdom. This is the meaning of unity." The older lord scowled but did not press the matter further. Others seemed uncertain but kept their peace. After a moment, Yara Greyjoy folded her arms regarding Jon with a skeptical yet grudging respect. "If you're going to cross the sea, I assume you'll need ships," she said. "The Iron Islands might be able to spare a few, but I want something in return." Jon squared his shoulders. "Name it." Yara's lips curved into a thin smile. "Your pledge that the Iron Islands can raid the coasts of the Summer Isles unimpeded. Our people need a target for their reaving. We'll keep well away from Westeros, but we must maintain our traditions." Tyrion wrinkled his nose, about to protest, but Jon cut him off. "No," he said. "We will not sanction more raids on innocent peoples. That's not unity, that's pillage. If the Iron Islands wish to explore or trade in the Summer Isles, so be it. But this is a new era. We do not stand behind unprovoked attacks." The tension rose. Yara gave him a sharp, assessing look. "So you say, but the Ironborn have always reaved to survive. You ask us to change who we are?" "I'm asking you to choose a better way," Jon replied. "We were forced to change when the dead came. We all did things we never thought we'd do. The question is, do we keep clinging to the old ways, or do we forge a path that doesn't invite more war? The Summer Islanders have done nothing to us, and we have enough resources in Westeros for trade and growth. If you truly believe in a unified realm, help us. Don't sabotage it for the sake of traditions rooted in bloodshed." There were mutters in the crowd. Yara's gaze flicked to Sansa, to Tyrion, then to Tormund, before returning to Jon. Finally, she exhaled and nodded once. "Very well. We'll discuss terms. But I won't have my people starve." "We'll see to it that you don't," Tyrion interjected. "Trade agreements can be arranged. We're not without flexibility, Lady Greyjoy." Yara relented, tension draining from the hall somewhat. That gave opportunity for a Dornish envoy to inquire about their own demands, which Sansa and Tyrion addressed with calm negotiation. The meeting wore on late into the night, but by the end, most lords seemed tentatively willing to support Jon's expedition. Those who were not fully on board at least did not openly oppose it. Jon retreated to his chamber near midnight, shoulders aching with strain. He found Ghost curled at the foot of his bed, ears perked. The dire wolf was uneasy here, among so many new scents and the swampy air of the neck, but he refused to leave Jon's side. Jon patted Ghost's flank, grateful for his silent companionship. Then he stripped off his cloak, leaning against the rough stone wall. The flickering candlelight made shadows dance across the chamber. He wondered if he was truly ready to face Drogon, and the memory of Daenerys that the dragon carried. He wondered if forging an alliance with the Free Folk and the Southern Lords was even possible, or if it was merely a fleeting dream. So many times Jon had tried to do the right thing, and so many times it had ended in tragedy. But again and again he found himself in the role of a leader. Perhaps that was his fate. Perhaps there was no escaping the burden that his fathers, both Ned Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, had left him. As he extinguished the candle and let darkness envelop the room, Jon prayed silently to both the old gods and the Seven, if they still listened, that he would be strong enough to hold Westeros together. If he failed, the realm could shatter once more, and next time there might be no saving it. Bran arrived a few days later. The king traveled with minimal escort, relying on his newfound authority and Sansa's advanced guard to clear the way. He glided into Moat Cailin's courtyard in his wheeled chair, propelled by a solemn Kingsguard knight. The lords and ladies assembled to greet him. Even Yara, stony-faced, bent her head in respect. Bran's face was almost mask-like, calm, detached, as though he peered through the weirwood roots of time itself. But a flicker of warmth passed over his features when Jon and Sansa stepped forward to welcome him. That evening, a formal audience was held in the Great Hall with Bran seated at the head of the table. Beside him stood Brienne, her white cloak marking her station, and Podrick Payne, now a knight as well. Tyrion took his place as Hand, Sansa as Lady of Winterfell, Sam as Grand Maester, and so on. The lords of Westeros filed in, their retinues behind them, forming a crowded but orderly assembly. Jon stood near Bran, feeling the weight of every gaze upon him. Bran addressed them in a voice that was soft yet carried the echoes of prophecy. I have seen much in my time as the three-eyed raven. I know the histories of this realm, its triumphs, and its terrors. We stand on the brink of a new chapter. If we cling to old grudges, old ways of hatred, we risk everything we have built. And there are forces beyond our shores that may wish to test our resolve. I ask you to trust one another, to trust me, and to trust Jon Snow, who has agreed to serve as my emissary to the lands beyond the narrow sea. He goes with my blessing and under the banner of House Stark. Let none doubt his purpose or his loyalty to Westeros. No one dared speak against the king openly. Jon sensed, however, the underlying doubts that still simmered. Yet in the hush that followed, a reluctant acceptance seemed to settle over the assembly. King Bran had spoken, and for now that would be enough. Over the following weeks, final preparations began for Jon's departure. Yara provided 3 ships from the Iron Fleet, their sails a deep gray with the Kraken sigil. House Manderley from White Harbor offered another 4 ships, sturdy northern vessels crewed by experienced sailors who had navigated the Shivering Sea. A handful of adventurous free folk also volunteered to sail, eager for new horizons. Tormund claimed he hated boats but refused to let Jon go off alone. If you're gonna get yourself eaten by a dragon, I at least want to see it happen, he joked with a hearty laugh. Jon spent his days organizing supplies, forging letters of introduction for any foreign dignitaries, and selecting the right mix of warriors, diplomats, and explorers to accompany him. Among them was Ser Davos Seaworth, who arrived partway through the planning with a band of Stormlander sailors. Heard you needed a steady hand at the tiller, Davos said by way of greeting. I know a thing or two about crossing seas, and I'd prefer we don't all drown before we find this dragon. Jon clasped the old knight's hand with genuine relief. Ser Davos, I'm glad you're here. I could use your counsel. Davos gave him a wry smile. I'll do what I can, but I'd prefer to keep my feet on solid ground if we end up tangling with a dragon. I've seen what they can do. The day before they were to depart, Jon strolled the perimeter of Moat Cailin's walls, or what passed for walls. He gazed at the bogs and marshes of the neck, lost in thought, when he heard the soft creak of wheels. Turning, he saw Bran approaching in his chair, pushed gently by Podrick. The young king waved Podrick away for privacy, and the dutiful knight bowed and stepped back. Bran's eyes, ageless and calm, fixed on Jon. I wanted to see you before you left, Bran said. We may not see each other again for a long while. Jon swallowed. You think I won't return? I see many paths, Bran replied, his voice as tranquil as ever. Some lead you back, some do not, but that doesn't mean you will fail. Sometimes sacrifice is necessary. Jon looked away, unsettled by his brother's cryptic words. I'll do my best, that's all I can promise. I don't want to fail this realm. I've seen too much destruction already. Bran rested his gloved hand on Jon's forearm. I know. And you must know this, the realm is not merely the sum of its kings and lords. It is its people, its memories. If you find Drogon, if you see signs of a new threat rising in Essos, remember that unity is our only shield. The free folk, the southern houses, the Ironborn, the Dornish, we stand, or we fall, together. Jon nodded, letting out a breath. I understand. Bran's gaze drifted over the horizon. The dragons were once the harbingers of both greatness and ruin. Let us hope that this time they herald something new. The morning of departure dawned gray and misty. The ships lay ready, bobbing gently in the waters that reached the edges of the next waterways, prepared to sail down the coast, around the tip of Westeros and onward across the narrow sea. It would be a long and perilous journey. Jon stood on the docks with Tormund, Ser Davos, and a handful of others, finalizing loadouts, speaking with the crews, verifying provisions. Sansa arrived in a cloak of stark gray, her hands tucked in front of her. She came to Jon and hugged him fiercely. Be safe, please, she whispered. Come back. I'll try, Jon said, stroking her hair gently. Keep the North strong. Help Bran in his rule. We'll need that unity if I succeed. She nodded, tears bright in her eyes. And if you don't succeed? She asked in a trembling voice. Jon tried to smile, though it was strained. I'll try anyway. Arya appeared behind them, silent as ever, and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. She said nothing, but her stare conveyed every unspoken wish for his survival. He nodded in acknowledgement, touching her hand briefly. Then he stepped away, taking Ghost's head in his hands and pressing his forehead to the direwolf's snout. Stay, he murmured. Protect Sansa, protect her home. Ghost whined low in his throat, red eyes gleaming with emotion. Jon turned and strode up the gangplank of the lead ship, Tormund at his side. Davos stood near the helm, barking orders to the sailors. Tyrion, who would remain behind to administer the king's affairs, offered a wave from the dock. Farewell, Jon Snow, he called. May your next dragon flight be less dramatic than your last. Jon gave a faint grin, but his heart pounded. He stood at the stern, watching the dock recede, seeing Sansa and Arya grow smaller, their figures blurred by the thickening fog. In that moment, he felt a pang of fear for the unknown. But he also felt a stirring of purpose. This was his role. To bridge the realms of fire and ice, to stand between the free folk and the southern lords, to see if dragons could be made allies rather than instruments of destruction. He did not know if he would find Drogon, if he would live to see Westeros again, or if his quest would end in another tragedy. But he knew he had to try. For the sake of the living, of every life touched by the wars of men, he had to try. The sails filled with wind. The Ironborn crew chanted as they pulled ropes and adjusted the rigging, the Manderly sailors responding with their own call. The ships drifted away from the fortress and into the broader waters, heading south. Mist curled around the prow like ghostly serpents. Jon stared ahead, gripping the railing, listening to Tormund grumble about the sea and Davos calling out to the helmsman. You look like you have a lot on your mind, Tormund said, clapping Jon on the shoulder. I do, Jon replied quietly, eyes on the horizon. But for once I have hope. Tormund chuckled, his voice rough and merry. Well, that's good. Means we'll live longer. Or die with a smile, at least. Jon bowed his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He recalled the words he once said long ago, we are the watchmen on the walls, the swords in the darkness. Now perhaps he was a different kind of watchman, scanning the horizon not only for threats, but for a chance at a peaceful dawn. As the ship sailed on, Westeros fading behind them, Jon Snow's journey began anew. He carried with him the unity of the free folk and the realm, a fragile alliance born of ice and tempered by fire. Before him stretched endless seas and endless possibilities, a realm to reunite, a dragon to reclaim, and a future that balanced precariously on his choices. And in that uncertain dawn, the memory of what once was and what could yet be shimmered like the reflection of sunlight upon the waves, a promise that maybe, this time, the living could forge a lasting peace under the watchful eyes of dragons. And the men who dared to call them friend. Jon awoke to the rolling sway of the deck beneath his boots, a crisp wind tugging at his hair and carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. He had slept little during the voyage so far. The nights were filled with longing thoughts of Winterfell, of Sansa and Arya, of ghosts prowling the castle corridors. He was grateful, at least, for the presence of Tormund, whose snores thundered through the cabin walls, as well as Davos, who had experience enough at sea to keep the newly assembled crew in order. 7 ships in total, carrying an unusual mix of Northmen, Ironborn, Manderly sailors, free folk, and a handful of knights from King Bran's personal guard. It was the strangest fleet Westeros might ever have dispatched, yet it was also a symbol of the fragile unity Jon hoped to preserve. At first light, he stood at the prow of the lead ship and stared out over the surging waves. The sails bore the heraldry of House Manderly, a merman with trident, but among them flew a plain black banner to mark Jon's own retinue. In truth, it felt odd not to see any sigil of House Stark or Targaryen on his flag, but this was how it had to be, a figure standing outside the old traditions, bridging both halves of his bloodline without claiming the throne of either. The morning fog thinned, revealing an endless expanse of gray-blue waters rippled by a steady current. Gull cries mingled with the flap of sails. Sometimes he thought he felt Daenerys's presence on the wind, that faint memory of her perfume and the warmth of her skin. But it was only the sea breeze and his own regrets. He heard boots on the planks behind him, and he turned to find Davos approaching, hand resting on the pommel of a short sword he wore more for ceremony than utility. The old knight gave him a polite nod. You're awake early, my lord, he said, then caught himself. Though I suppose my lord might not be the proper address any longer. Jon offered a faint smile. I'm not sure what the proper address is these days. Jon, will do. Or snow if you prefer. Jon then. Davos glanced out at the sea. The winds are with us, so the captain thinks we'll make good time around Dorne's southern cape. If that goes smoothly, we can stock supplies in Volantis before crossing the summer sea. Essos is a big place, though. Once we reach the other side, where do we start looking? Jon blew out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. That's the question. Drogon was last rumored near Old Valyria and also near the Dothraki Sea. Some say dragons hate the haunted ruins of Valyria. Others say the old magic draws them in. Sam's best guess was to begin near Slaver's Bay, Meereen, Astapor, Ukai, and see if the Dothraki there have any news. The Targaryen presence was strong in that region not long ago. Davos folded his arms. It's a good starting point. And we might find allies who still remember Queen Daenerys fondly. Might also find enemies. It's the people who unite for a cause that save the realm, not the lord who claims it by right. You proved that in the war against the dead. Jon only nodded. He turned his gaze toward the horizon and wondered if the entire realm's fate once again hinged on the shoulders of a few determined people willing to do the impossible. Perhaps so. Sometimes destiny was just another word for duty. A shout rang out from the quarterdeck, the watchman calling that another ship was drawing closer. Moments later, Jon saw the Ironborn vessel sliding up alongside them, adjusting its course so that Yara Greyjoy, perched at the helm, might hail him. The bright morning sun glinted off the brine-slicked boards as she signaled for them to reduce sail. The Ironborn crew, with shaved heads and salt-stiff leathers, eyed Jon's ship warily, though there was no animosity in their gaze, merely curiosity about these southerners and free folk thrown together. Yara's voice carried across the gap. All well, Snow? She squinted, her dark hair whipped by the wind. We're running low on fresh water. Should we make for one of the western ports first? Jon lifted his chin. We'll round the Cape of Wrath soon enough. We can anchor at Sunspear or even Planky Town if we must, but we'll decide once we see the state of the coast. I'd prefer to keep our presence quiet if we can. Not every Dornish lord is on friendly terms with the north. Yara's lips curved in a smirk. Fine. But if we run out of water, you can explain to my men why we're sucking on salt cod for days. They'll love that. She barked a laugh and turned back to give orders to her pilot. The Ironborn ship peeled away. Jon felt Davos watching him, waiting until they had privacy again. We may have to walk a careful line, the older knight said. Making port in Dorne without an invitation could be seen as a breach of courtesy, especially with tensions so high. If word spreads that you're out at sea leading a small armada, some might think you've come to conquer, not to negotiate. Jon grimaced. We'll manage. The less time we linger in Westeros, the better. I don't want to give anyone an excuse to sabotage our mission. They set a course to follow the coast at a reasonable distance, hoping to skirt Dorne's southern waters and avoid direct confrontation. Even so, they spotted sails on the horizon at times. Merchant cogs, fishing boats, perhaps privateers. On the third day along the coast, the wind picked up to a fierce gale, driving the ships onward with alarming speed. Rain slashed down. The deck grew slick beneath their boots, forcing Jon and his crew to tie themselves to rails or masts for safety. Thunder rumbled overhead, lightning forked across a darkening sky, and Tormund cackled as though he found some perverse joy in weather that threatened to capsize them. Davos, clinging to the helm, yelled through the howling wind, "We'll need to sail closer to shore or risk being blown off course." Jon could barely hear him above the roar, but he nodded in agreement. If they lost their bearings, they might drift all the way to the Summer Islands or crash against unseen reefs. The ships turned eastward, sails reefed, cutting through the waves that tossed them like driftwood. That storm raged for 2 nights and a day, seeming to follow them around Dorne's southern tip. More than once, Jon thought the mainmast might snap beneath the strain. But at last, dawn broke on calm seas. The water lay eerily flat and the sun rose in a molten glow. With relief, they took stock of their small fleet. One of the Manderley ships was gone, carried off, or possibly sunk, and another trailed behind with a damaged mast. Yara's flagship signaled that it would circle back to search for survivors. Eventually, it returned, battered but intact, with no sign of the missing vessel beyond some splintered wreckage. The mood turned grim. Already, they had lost lives. Jon felt the weight of that loss pressing down on him, and he could see the same heaviness in the eyes of his men. But they had no choice but to push onward, mourning quietly in their hearts. This quest would demand more sacrifices before the end. Jon wondered if, in the end, it would be worth it. With their battered ships, they decided to make port at Planky Town in southern Dorne after all. The approach to the mouth of the Green Blood River was lined with thick reeds and wooden piers that jutted into the muddy waters. Overhead soared black-winged gulls and cormorants. Houses perched on stilts dotted the shoreline and narrow boardwalks snaked between them. As they drew closer, Dornish fishermen stared from small boats, evidently startled by the arrival of an armed flotilla. Jon stood at the bow wearing a simple black cloak and plain leather armor. He had told his men to show no house banners aside from the Manderley sails and Yara's kraken, keeping the Stark connection minimal to avoid inflaming old grudges. Tormund eyed the scenery with a wrinkled nose. We came all this way to live in swamp huts? Davos gave a short laugh. Planky town's bigger than it looks. Most trade from inland Dorne passes through here before shipping out. They won't be happy to see an armed force, though. Sure enough, as the ships advanced, a horn blasted from one of the wooden watchtowers along the river. Figures scrambled on the piers, and soon a handful of sleek Dornish rafts came skimming toward them, loaded with archers. Jon raised an open palm in a sign of peace. The Dornish archers shouted warnings in a dialect that blended the common tongue with Rhoynish. Davos leaned over to Jon. Let me speak first if they'll parley. Jon nodded, stepping aside to let Davos call out. We mean no harm. We seek shelter and repairs. We are emissaries from King Bran the Broken. Let us land and we will pay for provisions. A stern-faced woman wearing scaled leather armor and a helm of beaten bronze raised a hand to her archers. We know of no permission from Sunspear to welcome you, she called back. Who commands this fleet? Jon stepped forward. I do. Jon Snow. Her eyes flicked to him, then to his ships. And who are you to demand entry to Dorne? Davos spread his hands, smiling diplomatically. No one demands anything, my lady. But we come in good faith. We lost a ship in the storm and others need masts replaced. We'll pay fairly or we'll move on if you refuse. She considered this clearly uncertain. Planky Town was used to visitors, traders, mercenaries, travelers from the Summer Islands, but a small armada from the North and the Iron Islands had to be cause for concern. At last, she signaled an archer who blew a sharp note on a horn. Very well, she said. We will escort you to the docks. Do not leave your ships with weapons drawn. We'll see about your repairs. They followed her rafts upriver to a cluster of wharves. The place bustled with merchants shouting in the hot midday sun. The air was muggy, thick with the scent of brackish water and the sweet tang of exotic spices. As soon as they moored, armed Dornish guards approached, halberds gleaming. Their armor was a mix of polished steel and leather dyed in bright oranges and reds. Jon could feel tension in the air, his own men bristling at the sight of drawn weapons. But he forced a calm expression, beckoning Tormund and Davos to his side. The stern-faced woman introduced herself as Captain Oliva. I maintain order here on behalf of Lady Nemella Santagar, who rules these lands in the name of the king. Though Dorne does not easily bend a knee, we pay nominal respect to the crown. She looked at the battered state of the ships. You look like you've been through a squall or two. Ramund snorted. I lost one of our ships off your cape. Her gaze swept across their mismatched company. The tall, broad-shouldered wildlings, the wiry iron-born, the sailors in Manderley colors. You're a motley bunch, she said, unimpressed. I'll direct you to the shipwrights' quarter, but any trouble in our town and you'll answer to me. Is that clear? Jon nodded. It is. He glanced at Davos. Pay for what we need. Food, supplies, repairs. No one stirs conflict. If you must come ashore, do so in small groups. Captain Oliva led them along a rickety boardwalk, the wood slick with green algae. Dockworkers muttered under their breath as the foreigners passed. But no one challenged them. The presence of armed Dornish soldiers likely helped. They passed open-air stalls selling fish, dates, peppers, and pungent cheeses. Flies buzzed around baskets of fruit. Tormund, always curious, reached out to grab a pepper. He bit into it and coughed violently, tears streaming down his face. Davos and Jon couldn't help but laugh as Tormund spat and cursed. A passing vendor cackled at the big man's misfortune. They settled negotiations for lumber and fresh water at a sweltering inn perched on pilings above the murky river. Jon, Davos, and Tormund sat around a wooden table while Captain Oliva introduced them to a local shipwright. The man named his price, far higher than Jon liked, but they had few alternatives. They bartered until a deal was reached, the Dornishmen agreeing to refit the worst damaged ship. Jon left the Manderley quartermaster to handle the payment in coin. Afterwards, they retreated to a corner of the inn to sip watered wine and discuss their next move. Tormund wiped sweat from his brow. This heat is worse than a winter's day spent burying your head in a mammoth's ass. Davos winced. Colorful as always. Jon could barely stomach the cloying wine. His shirt clung to his skin, the dampness of Dorne's humidity making him yearn for the crisp, pine-scented air of the north. We should sail as soon as repairs are complete. I don't want to linger. Word of our arrival could reach Sunspear, and we'll have more politics to deal with. Tormund drained his cup with a grimace. Fine by me. This place stinks. At least at sea. The smell is bracing. Davos eyed Jon. We might want to scout for any information here, though. Plankytown sees travelers from Essos, ships from Volantis, Lys, even Slaver's Bay. Someone might have heard rumors of a black dragon or unusual sightings. Could give us a lead. Jon considered the idea. All right, but quietly. No broadcasting that we're hunting a dragon. That'll only draw the wrong sort of attention. With that plan set, Tormund and a few free folk volunteers roved the docks, striking up idle conversations with foreigners where they could. Davos did similarly among the traders, while Jon stayed near the ships to keep watch for potential threats from the local garrison. By nightfall, they reconvened at the inn's cramped common room. Tormund was shaking his head. Lots of talk about storms in the summer sea, corsairs raiding up from the Basilisk Isles, the usual. Not a peep about dragons. Davos shrugged, his expression disappointed. One fellow claimed to have seen something massive and winged near the Gulf of Grief, but that was months ago. Could have been a wyvern from Sithorios for all we know. He wasn't sober enough to be sure. Jon nodded, unsurprised. Then we'll push on to Volantis or Meereen. That's where Daenerys's old power base was strongest. Someone there might remember Drogon or have news of his whereabouts. For now, let's rest and leave at first light once the supplies are loaded. They scattered to their bunks in the ships or cramped attic rooms the inn offered for a steep price. Jon took one such room, grateful for even a meager cot off the deck. Sleep did not come easily. The wooden walls were thin, letting in the ceaseless symphony of croaking frogs, chirping insects, and murmured voices from the common room below. Jon lay in the dark, replaying memories of the last time he'd sailed far from Westeros with Daenerys at his side. They had been filled with hope back then, despite the White Walker threat. He had thought they could save the world together. The ache in his chest returned, and he wondered if that pain would ever fade. He must have dozed eventually because he jolted awake to frantic knocking at his door. Tormund's muffled voice rumbled through the wood. Jon, get up. Trouble on the docks. Jon threw on his boots and grabbed Long Claw, strapping it to his side. Down the creaky stairs and out into the pre-dawn darkness he ran, Tormund at his side. A warm drizzle of rain fell, turning the boardwalks slick. Ahead, torches flared at the waterfront where Jon's ships were moored, and shouts rang out through the humid air. He arrived to find Dornish guards in tense standoff with Yara's Ironborn, who bristled around a figure on the planks. A young Ironborn crewman lay dead, a Dornish soldier standing over him with a bloody spear. Captain Oliva was there too, face grim, half her men fanned out behind her. Yara glared daggers at the captain, and her crew clutched axes and short swords. Jon shoved forward. What happened? Yara's voice was taut with anger. They claimed this boy was stealing from a market stall and tried to kill one of their guards. They ran him through. Now they say they'll take 3 more of my men into custody for questioning. Oliva kept her spear pointed downward, blood dripping from the tip. Your man drew a blade first. I lost a guard in the scuffle as well. This won't go unanswered. Jon looked between the two groups, the air thick with hostility. Another dead guard lay off to one side, a throwing knife embedded in his throat. The boardwalk was spattered with fresh blood, the torchlight painting everything in lurid orange. Tormund cursed under his breath. Davos arrived at Jon's side, breathing hard. Jon raised his hands, voice firm. Stop this now. We're not here to kill Dornishmen, nor do we want more deaths on either side. He turned to Yara, voice lowered. Order your people to stand down. If we start a war in Dorne, we'll never reach Essos. Yara's lips curled, but she gave a curt nod. Stand down, she barked to her Ironborn, who reluctantly lowered their weapons. She faced Oliva. What do you want, then? Blood for blood. Captain Oliva's jaw tightened. That's Dornish law, but maybe we can settle this with Wergeld. Gold to the families. Or perhaps you prefer the spear trial by combat. Jon interjected. We have coin. We'll pay restitution for the wrongdoing here. It was a drunken brawl, nothing more. He glanced at the bodies. We'll see to it the families are compensated on both sides. Let's not let this escalate. Olyva hesitated. If this had happened in Sunspear, you might find the Prince of Dorne less forgiving. Jon forced calm into his voice. We have no quarrel with your prince or your laws. I beg you accept the coin. We leave at sunrise, and we will trouble you no further. The torches sputtered in the drizzle. Finally, Olyva gave a terse nod. So be it. But your men remain on their ships until you depart. One more incident, and you'll leave with fewer heads. Yara matched her glare. We'll be gone soon enough. Jon released a breath, tension bleeding from his muscles as the two groups slowly withdrew. The bodies were taken away, and he spent the rest of that pre-dawn hour organizing a purse of gold for Olyva to distribute. Yara muttered curses, hating to part with coin in what she saw as an unfair settlement, but they both knew that letting this situation spiral into further bloodshed would doom the mission. They sailed at first light, battered sails hoisted, the hulls laden with fresh water and mended spars. Planky Town vanished behind them in the gray morning haze. As they navigated past the mouth of the Green Blood, a hush seemed to fall over the fleet, everyone too drained to speak. They had lost men in the storm and in a pointless conflict with the Dornish. Even Tormund looked subdued, picking at a scab on his knuckles, lost in thought. Davos quietly oversaw the navigation, ensuring they angled southeast around Westeros's coastline. By late afternoon, the last outlines of Dorne's hills sank below the horizon and they were out on the open water, the summer sea stretching before them. The wind was mild, the sky pale blue, dotted with wispy clouds. They set their bearing toward Slaver's Bay, the route that led past the Stepstones and Liss. The days turned into weeks, with the sea as their constant companion. Currents shifted, and they occasionally glimpsed foreign ships in the distance, merchant galleys bearing the flags of Liss, Tyrosh, or the Summer Islands, or else suspicious vessels that might have been pirates. None approached too closely once they spotted the number of warlike ships in Jon's convoy. Yara and her Ironborn stood ready at all times, axes and crossbows at the rails. During this passage, Jon fell into a routine. Each morning he woke early to check the sails and speak with Davos or the captains about their course. Midday he trained with Tormund or sparred with some of the knights who had accompanied them, trying to keep his body honed. In the evenings he gathered with the men for meager meals of salt fish, dried bread, and watered ale. But mostly he found himself pacing the deck, restlessness gnawing at him like a dog on a bone. There was too much time to brood, to wonder if they were sailing toward a fool's errand. Sometimes he found himself staring east as if he could see Drogon's black wings in the distance. It was on the 20th day after leaving Dorne that the lookout shouted down from the crow's nest, "Ship off the starboard bow." Flying a white standard, looks like a galley, Myrish design. Jon and Davos hurried to the rail. Sure enough, a slim Myrish galley coasted toward them, its oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Atop its single mast flew a plain white flag of parley. Jon ordered his own banner raised in reply, a plain black cloth with no sigil, meaning neutral approach. They slowed their sails, letting the galley close the distance carefully while the rest of Jon's fleet fanned out behind him in a show of cautious force. As the galley approached, Jon could see figures on its deck, a lean man with short swords and a tall man wearing a half-cape of green. The tall man stood at the prow, calling out in passable common tongue, "Greetings, strangers. May we approach to speak terms of safe passage?" Jon gave the nod, and a rope ladder was lowered for the man to come aboard. Tormund and two knights flanked Jon as the visitor set foot on the deck. He had a well-trimmed black beard, sharp eyes, and a confident air. He introduced himself as Captain Morrow of Myr. "I sail these waters frequently," he said. "Heard rumors from Planky Town that a fleet from Westeros was heading east. Big news in these seas. Mind if I ask your purpose?" Jon measured the man's expression. He didn't trust easily, but if there was a chance for fresh information, he'd take it. "We're traveling to Slaver's Bay on business of the King of Westeros. We mean no harm to lawful ships." Captain Morrow nodded, scanning the deck and the grim faces of the Northmen, Ironborn, and Free Folk. "You appear well armed. These waters are plagued by corsairs from the Stepstones and beyond. If you're hunting them, you'll find no shortage of targets." "We're hunting no one," Jon said. "We just want safe passage." Morrow rubbed his beard. "Safe passage can be bought, in a manner of speaking. Some of the pirate captains around the stepstones will harry even a sizable fleet if they think there's gold in it. But if you're looking for shelter, the nearest free port is Lys or Tyrosh. I'd avoid Volantis if you can. There's talk of unrest, renewed temple zealots stirring trouble. Not to mention the meltdown in Slavers Bay. Meereen might look stable from afar, but the fighting pits are open again and new warlords have crawled out of the cracks. Jon's chest tightened. Warlords? Morrow shrugged. I only know what I hear in taverns. Some slaver families are trying to return to power. The peace that the Dragon Queen enforced didn't last long after she left. I also heard. Well, rumors of a beast in the skies. Some swear it's a black dragon, but no one knows where it roosts. The stories range from Karth to Valyria. Hard to separate truth from sailors' tall tales. Jon exchanged a glance with Davos and Tormund. This was more concrete than anything they'd gleaned in Dorne. Have you heard who might be controlling this dragon, if it exists? Nobody claims control, Morrow said. But men always try to spin stories that some new Targaryen pretender has hatched from the ashes or that a warlord from the east found a dragon egg. Nonsense, if you ask me. Dragons don't just pick new masters for sport. Jon said nothing, feeling the old guilt gnawing at him. Of course, it was no secret that Daenerys had once ruled Meereen and left it in fragile shape when she sailed for Westeros. With her gone, old evils had crept back. He closed his eyes briefly, remembering what she had told him of her efforts to break the wheel of slavery. So many hopes undone. Captain Morrow scratched the back of his neck. I could direct you to a safer route for a price. Show you a passage that avoids the heaviest pirate activity near the stepstones. My men and I can lead your fleet in exchange for a pouch of gold dragons. Better than stumbling blind into those coves. Jon looked to Davos, who nodded in agreement. They had gold left from King Bran's treasury and Sansa's careful provisioning. If it would save them from an ambush, it was worth it. Very well, Jon said. We'll pay, but if you deceive us, you'll have the Ironborn to contend with. Morrow laughed softly. Deceive a fleet of war-hungry northerners and reavers? I'm not that foolish. Deal? They struck the bargain, and soon Morrow's galley led their formation in a cautious arc skirting the isles known for pirate dens. It took them the better part of a week to navigate that region. On 2 occasions, they glimpsed suspicious sails creeping over the horizon, but each time, the presence of 7 formidable ships must have deterred an attack. At last, the sea opened up into warmer waters, a richer hue of turquoise, with the hot sun blazing overhead. Morrow parted ways, whistling happily over the clink of gold in his purse. Jon watched the galley recede, uncertain whether to be grateful or uneasy. The world beyond Westeros felt more complicated than ever. After another stretch of days, their battered fleet drew near the coast that led up to Volantis. The plan was to pass it by, though, heading farther east toward Meereen. More than once, Davos or one of the other navigators suggested stopping in Volantis for supplies. But each time, the memory of Morrow's warning about unrest swayed Jon to keep going. They had enough casks of water and salted fish to reach Meereen, though it would be tight. Their fortunes took a sudden turn one scorched midday. Clouds rolled in from the north, heavy with moisture, and a strong wind kicked up. The horizon blurred, and the sun vanished behind a gathering front. Jon suspected another storm, but Tormund gave a sniff and said, "Doesn't smell like a normal squall." As they hurried to batten down the sails, the wind abruptly shifted to a blast of scorching heat. The sea churned, and a swirling funnel formed on the surface, a waterspout dancing across the waves. It towered into the sky, a twisting column of black water and raging wind. Shouts rang out. Jon yelled for the helmsman to steer away, but the spout changed direction with terrifying speed, bearing down on them. The ship scrambled, sails flapping wildly. In the chaos, Yara's vessel found itself too close to the vortex. Jon watched with horror from his own deck as the swirling column nearly lifted Yara's ship, tilting it precariously. The mast cracked, sails ripping. Then, just as suddenly, the waterspout tore away to the east, sparing them a complete catastrophe. It dissipated moments later in the distance, leaving a restless sea behind. Cursing under his breath, Jon ordered his ship alongside Yara's to assess damage. Her mainmast was shattered. The Ironborn crew had managed to cut away rigging to keep it from toppling the hull, but the vessel was barely operational. Yara herself stood on the deck, hair soaked with spray, her eyes blazing with frustration. "That's 2 storms the gods have hurled at us. If I believed in omens, I'd say we're cursed." Davos used a speaking trumpet to address her from across the gap. "We'll rig a tow line and get you to calmer waters. Then we can see about repairs. Jon glimpsed the black clouds still roiling overhead. We have to move quickly. There might be more spouts. It took hours of delicate maneuvering to lash ropes between Yara's ship and one of the Manderley vessels, which then tugged it slowly eastward. Their progress was agonizingly slow, but no further storms emerged that day. Instead, a relentless heat descended, sapping everyone's strength and morale. The crew withered under the sun, rationing what little water remained. Tormund spat over the side. I'd kill for a snowdrift right about now. Eventually, on a late afternoon that found the fleet drifting across still waters like ghosts, one of the lookout cries rang out, "Land ahead." It must be the shores near Meereen. That sparked a renewed surge of energy among the men. They trimmed the sails as best they could, coaxing every knot of speed from the battered vessels. As dusk fell, they saw torchlights flickering along a distant shoreline, the faint silhouette of grand pyramids rising against the darkening sky. Jon's heart squeezed at the sight. Daenerys had once ruled there, perched atop the Great Pyramid with her dragons roosting. She had walked these streets, freed slaves, and abolished the fighting pits. Only for them to reopen in her absence. He wondered what might greet them now. Was Meereen stable enough to let them land in peace? Or had the city fallen under new tyrants? They decided to anchor in the bay under cover of darkness, away from the main harbor, and send a small scouting party to assess the situation at dawn. Davos volunteered to lead that party, accompanied by Tormund and a handful of Iron-born rowers. Jon wanted to go himself, but Davos insisted that the overall command should remain on the main ship in case something went wrong. Jon agreed with reluctance, though Tormund's presence in the rowboat gave him some comfort. If danger lurked, Tormund wouldn't hesitate to fight. Night came, and with it a blanket of humid air that pressed on them like a smothering cloth. Jon stood at the rail, gazing toward the faint glow of Meereen. He couldn't help but recall the stories Daenerys told him of her struggles there. The Sons of the Harpy Rebellion, the endless political factions. If she had truly broken the wheel, it seemed men had repaired it in her absence. Would any remember her kindly? Would they hate the man who had ended her dream in Westeros? Sleep came in fitful bursts. When the earliest streaks of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Jon found himself already awake, scanning the waters for the returning rowboat. Hours crawled by, the sun climbing higher until at last the watchers spotted it. The boat glided through the mild surf, Tormund and Davos at the oars, sweat gleaming on their faces. They pulled up alongside Jon's ship, breathing hard. Jon leaned over the rail. "Well?" Davos stood, rubbing his shoulder. "We landed in a small fishing village outside the city walls. Saw no immediate thr. Eat." The fishermen were skittish but said Meereen is held by a coalition of Sellsword Company's former mercenaries who rose to power after Daenerys left. They call themselves the Triumvirate. They're not exactly kind to outsiders, but they're not currently at war. The city's gates are open for trade if you pay the right bribes. Tormund spat into the sea. They didn't give a damn about us until we mentioned we might have gold to spend. They told us to anchor at the main harbor if we want to do business. But be prepared to pay tribute for safe docking. Jon sighed. So much for Daenerys' vision of freedom. Davos nodded gravely. "I doubt we'll find loyal Targaryen supporters in power. But slaves are no longer openly bought and sold in the city, from what we heard. At least that part of her legacy might have endured, even if the new rulers are unscrupulous." Jon had faced unscrupulous lords before. The free folk, the Boltons, even Queen Cersei. He could handle the Triumvirate if that was the price of entry. "We'll go then," he said. "I'll meet these rulers and try to learn what they know of Drogon. But we keep enough men aboard the ships to protect them if things turn sour." By midday, the fleet approached Meereen's harbor. High sandstone walls and tall pyramids loomed above, etched with fading murals. Great bronze harpy statues perched on arches, reminders of the city's old slaver aristocracy. The main harbor was busy with trading vessels from all over Essos, fat-bellied merchant ships from Karth, slender dhows from the Basilisk Isles, even a lumbering Volantene cog. Harbor officials wearing the symbols of the Triumvirate patrolled the docks, flanked by armed mercenaries sporting mismatched bits of armor. Jon's ships dropped anchor near an old pier, the timbers creaking with disuse. Almost immediately, a gang of these mercenaries approached in a small rowboat, demanding to board and inspect. Yara, still furious about the storms and her damaged mast, nearly threatened them at arrow point. But Davos calmed the situation with some carefully chosen words and a purse of coin. The mercenaries grinned, pockets jingling, and told them they were now free to dock. "But if you plan to conduct business in the city," their leader sneered, "you'll want to speak to the Triumvirate or their spymaster. They don't like surprises." Jon disembarked with a party of 12 Davos, Tormund, and a mixed guard of Northmen and free folk. He left Yara in charge of the fleet, instructing her to keep an eye out for any sign of duplicity from the local authorities. They were greeted by a sweaty clerk who demanded another bribe for dock usage, then grudgingly directed them toward a broad avenue that led to Meereen's center. Passing beneath a gatehouse adorned with chipped carvings of harpies, they entered a city both vibrant and scarred. The architecture was grand, with wide streets paved in mosaic tiles, flanked by tall buildings of pale stone. Market stalls bustled with sellers hawking fruit, spiced meats, and bright cloth. Yet the stench of unclean gutters lingered in the midday heat, and beggars lingered in alleyways. Jon saw a few old men bearing the brand of former slaves on their cheeks, though they no longer wore slave collars. Here and there, children darted underfoot, eyes wide with curiosity at the strangers with pale skin and thick furs draped around their shoulders. Tormund muttered about the heat, unaccustomed to the scorching sun. As they progressed, guards in mismatched armor occasionally stopped them, demanding to know their business. Each time Davos flashed a coin or two, and they were waved on. It was a system of casual corruption that set Jon's teeth on edge. Daenerys had once tried to root out the bribe-takers, but it seemed that was undone. Eventually, they arrived at the steps of the Great Pyramid, the largest structure dominating Meereen's skyline. Its sides rose in steep terraces, each lined with carved stone. At the summit was a massive bronze harpy, once a symbol of the old slavers, but now the statue's head had been replaced by a battered effigy of 3 swords entwined, presumably the triumvirate's emblem. Sentries lounged at the base of the pyramid, and a board official with an ornate turban greeted them. "We come seeking audience with your rulers," Jon announced. "We have business regarding trade and other matters." The official didn't even bother to mask his disinterest. "Names?" Davos cleared his throat. "I am Ser Davos of Westeros. This is Jon Snow, emissary of King Bran in Westeros. We wish to speak with whomever is in charge here." "Of course you do," the official said, flipping through a small ledger. "The triumvirate convenes at their leisure. If you'd like an appointment, you'll have to wait. Or we can expedite your request for a fee." A muscle in Tormund's jaw twitched, and Jon quickly interceded. "We will pay if it means not waiting for days in this heat." His voice was terse. "But we expect results." The official's eyes gleamed with avarice. "That can be arranged." Coins exchanged hands again, and they were told to ascend the pyramid's interior corridor to a grand chamber. Soldiers escorted them, men wearing battered helms, carrying spears or crossbows, each with a sash of different color. The place was sweltering inside, lit by torches and narrow windows that let in shimmering columns of sunlight. Each step up the pyramid's sloping corridors felt like a climb through an oven. Jon's thoughts turned to Daenerys again. He remembered her describing how she had received petitions in a throne room up here, how she had tried to show mercy to the people. Now it was the seat of mercenaries. At last, they emerged into a spacious hall near the top. 3 large chairs, makeshift thrones, were arranged on a dais. Spread around them were armed guards, scribes, and courtiers in a swirl of color and steel. The triumvirate themselves sat with arrogant ease. In the center seat lounged a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head, a golden nose ring glinting in the torchlight. To his left, a slender woman in scaled armor, her hair styled in intricate braids. On the right, a tall man with piercing gray eyes and a jagged scar across his cheek. They all radiated a predatory confidence. Jon stepped forward, his guard arrayed behind him. He felt their stares and made himself remain calm. "I am Jon Snow, envoy from the King of Westeros. We've come to seek information and possibly trade opportunities." The shaved-head man raised an eyebrow. "Information about what, precisely?" Jon considered how much to reveal. "We've heard rumors of a dragon sighted in these lands. We believe it once belonged to the Targaryen queen who ruled here. If it's still alive, it may pose a threat or it may be an opportunity." A ripple of interest passed through the triumvirate's assembled courtiers. The slender woman with the braids leaned forward. "So, the rumors reach even Westeros?" Her accent was thick, each syllable pronounced with care. "Yes, people claim to see a black shadow in the sky. Some say it comes from Valyria to feed on livestock. Others say it circles the Dothraki Sea." The scarred man spoke next, voice cold. "And if we do know more, why should we share it with you?" Jon answered evenly. "We can offer trade, alliances, coin. We also bring knowledge of the western lands. And if the dragon is truly a threat, we can help ensure it doesn't burn your city to ash." The man with the shaved head barked a laugh. You think we fear dragons? We remember when the Dragon Queen ruled here. She freed the slaves, yes, but she also left chaos behind. My predecessors seized power by forging alliances with the Sellsword companies she disdained. Now we rule as the Triumvirate and we maintain order. If a dragon returns, we will kill it just as we kill anything that threatens our hold. Tormund let out a snort. Kill a dragon with what, exactly? You can't just stab it with a spear and hope it falls out of the sky. The slender woman's eyes flicked to Tormund, a slight curl of distaste on her lip. We have scorpions. Ballistae. Even a few alchemists and their fire, courtesy of certain allies in Karth. Our city is not defenseless. Davos attempted diplomacy. Still, it might be wiser to work with us than to try your luck alone. A dragon can be cunning. We have experience on our side. The Triumvirate exchanged glances, each reading the other's silent cues. At length, the scarred man spoke. Perhaps we could come to some arrangement. But first, you must prove your sincerity. Meereen thrives on commerce, so if you wish to remain here, you'll pay tariffs on any goods you bring ashore. Also, we do not appreciate large armed contingents in our streets. You'll keep your men on your ships unless invited. Jon agreed to their terms, albeit reluctantly, knowing he had little choice. The shaved-head man introduced himself as Mocker, the woman as Jala, and the scarred man as Oris. They were each a leader of a different Sellsword company, the Brazen Jackals, the Jade Scales, and the Ivory Claws, who together controlled Meereen's governance through intimidation, cunning, and coin. They were not savage bandits, but neither were they altruistic. They seemed to view everything through the lens of profit and power. Negotiations dragged on, with Mocker testing how far Jon would bend. They demanded gold for a city permit, safe docking rights, and lodging for Jon's men. Jon offered a portion of the treasury set aside for the expedition, cursing inwardly at how swiftly it was dwindling. In return, Mocker said they would be allowed to explore Meereen, speak to the people, even search out leads on Drogon, provided they caused no trouble. If you cross us, Jala purred, tapping the pommel of a curved dagger, you'll wish you had never set foot in this pyramid. By the time they left the Great Pyramid, Jon's stomach churned with frustration, but at least they had the Triumvirate's grudging permission to remain. Back outside, the sun was near setting, painting the city in a dull gold glow. Jon and his companions trudged down the winding corridors, each footstep echoing. Tormund muttered curses about southern leeches draining your coin, while Davos looked resigned. Jon found himself thinking that at least in Westeros, one could rely on some sense of honor, battered as it might be. Here, power belonged to those who took it, same as any place, but the scale of corruption felt overwhelming. They returned to the ships, posted extra guards around their moorings, and tried to settle in for the night. Jon found it impossible to rest. He paced the deck, staring at the shimmering lights of Meereen's harbor. So close to where Daenerys had once walked, the memories pressed down on him like a physical weight. Ghosts of a dream that died in fire. He felt Tormund's presence beside him, the big wildling leaning on the rail, saying nothing for a while. Eventually, Tormund spoke in a subdued voice. You miss her, don't you? The Dragon Queen. Jon's throat tightened. Every day. Even after everything that happened, I can't forget what she meant to me. Tormund nodded, expression uncharacteristically thoughtful. I didn't know her well, but you two had that look. The one that says you'd burn the world down for each other. Jon closed his eyes, guilt slicing at him. In the end, that's what she tried to do. I had to stop her. I know. Tormund scratched his beard. You did what was needed. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt like hell. Jon gripped the rail. We came here to find her dragon. But what if Drogon wants revenge? What if he's out there waiting to finish what she started? Tormund shrugged. Then we'll do what we must. If that means fighting it, so be it. But maybe it doesn't come to that. Maybe there's another way. Jon stared at the reflections of torchlight dancing on the black waters. I hope so. At dawn, Jon decided to split up his forces to gather information. Davos would oversee trade negotiations in the harbor to keep the Triumvirate placated. Tormund would take a few men to roam the city's outskirts, talking to farmers and shepherds about any dragon sightings. Jon himself would venture into the heart of Meereen, looking for those who might still remember Daenerys' time. Perhaps among her former freedmen or counselors there would be someone who could shed light on Drogon's fate. Jon dressed in plain leathers, carrying Longclaw at his hip, and took along a small escort, 2 free folk trackers and 1 knight from the north. They moved through narrow side streets, avoiding the main avenues where Triumvirate guards prowled. The old quarter near the fighting pits was a maze of tight alleys, crumbling walls, and makeshift bridges connecting rooftops. Graffiti covered many surfaces, some praising the Dragon Queen, others cursing her name. Jon paused at a faded mural that depicted Daenerys with silver hair, leading an army of freed slaves. Someone had scrawled a mocking edition, a chain around her neck, labeled False Messiah. He turned away, feeling a stab of sorrow. Whatever adoration the people once held, it had evidently soured with time and hardship. Still, if there were any loyalists left, they might gather in places dedicated to her memory. He recalled talk of a temple of the Graces where priests and priestesses once welcomed Daenerys. That temple might still stand on the eastern side of the city, near the old slave markets. He decided to head there. As they passed through winding streets, Jon noticed the tension in the air. People moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. Guards with various insignias loitered at corners, collecting bribes or bullying passers-by. More than once, Jon saw the evidence of petty violence, a merchant's stall overturned, a bruised youth nursing a broken lip. Daenerys's reign had not solved Meereen's deeper issues, and in her absence, the city had relapsed into a harsh reality. Eventually, they reached the Temple of the Graces, a structure with fluted columns and carved reliefs, its exterior once painted a bright turquoise, now peeling and cracked. Inside, a hush reigned. The tall arches let in beams of sunlight that illuminated motes of dust in the air. A handful of worshippers knelt before a statue of the Giscari goddess of fertility, while robed acolytes moved quietly among them. One acolyte approached Jon with polite curiosity. Jon spoke softly. "I seek knowledge of the days when Queen Daenerys Targaryen ruled Meereen. Do any here remember that time?" The acolyte, an older woman with a shaved head, regarded him with sharp interest. "And who are you to seek such memories?" Jon hesitated. He didn't wish to draw too much attention. "I am Jon. I come from Westeros. I was close to her once. I wish to honor her memory if I can." She studied him for a moment, eyes flicking to his sword. "Wait here. I will fetch someone." Jon's guard tensed as she walked away, suspicious that it might be a trap. But after several minutes, she returned with a stooped man in dusty, tattered robes. He looked ancient, with skin like wrinkled parchment and eyes clouded with cataracts. He leaned on a staff as he approached. "So you come seeking the queen who was—" the old man rasped. "I was a humble advisor in the temple during her rule. I saw her speak to our highest priestesses, the Blue Graces. She was unlike any ruler we had known. Merciful yet fierce." Jon's chest felt tight. "Then you must know what happened after she left. Did she truly break the shackles of this city? Or—" "She tried," the old man said. "For a time, Meereen walked a new path. No slaves in chains, no fighting pits. But the sons of the Harpy and other factions rose to undermine her. When she flew away on the Black Dragon, Drogon, some believed she abandoned us. Others believed she would return. But she never did. The pit fighters clamored to reopen the arenas. The masters reclaimed lost wealth. And in the struggle that followed, Sellsword companies gained control." His milky eyes flicked toward Jon. "You knew her well?" Jon spoke quietly, mindful of the hush of the temple. "I did. I served by her side for a time. She saved many lives but lost herself in the end. I am sorry." The old man bowed his head. "I have heard rumors of what transpired in Westeros, though details are scarce. The people of Meereen do not trust the Triumvirate's news. But I sense your sincerity. You seek her dragon?" "Yes," Jon admitted. "We believe Drogon still lives somewhere across the sea. If we find him, perhaps we can avert new destruction. Or else, guide him to a more peaceful path." The old man's staff tapped on the stone floor. "A perilous quest. You may not be the only ones who want that dragon. There are those who see in Drogon a path to power. Be wary. As for where he might be," he paused, breathing shallowly. "In the early days, some freedmen claimed to see him winging south toward the Great Grass Sea. Others said he flew to Valyria. I suspect he roams untamed without a rider. But I cannot say for certain." Jon lowered his gaze, disappointment tugging at him. "Thank you. If you hear of anything more concrete." A sudden commotion broke out near the temple entrance. Raised voices echoed off the columns, and Jon's guards drew their weapons on instinct. Two men wearing the jade scales insignia burst in, brandishing curved swords. "We're looking for the foreigners from Westeros," one growled. "We know they came here. By order of Triarch Jella, they're to be brought in for questioning." Jon cursed under his breath. So much for subtlety. The old man stumbled back, staff clattering. Worshippers scattered, frightened by the intrusion. Jon signaled for his men to hold their ground. We have permission to move freely in the city. We've broken no laws. The mercenaries sneered. You were told to keep a low profile, yet here you are stirring the old faith. Come quietly, or we'll drag you in chains. Jon's jaw clenched. He glanced at his guard. The corridor behind them lay open. They could possibly run, but that might make them fugitives. Or they could fight, but that would ruin any chance of cooperation with the triumvirate. He forced himself to remain calm. We'll come, but we will walk on our own feet. Keep your chains. The mercenary flicked his gaze to Jon's sword. Leave your steel. Swords are not allowed in the presence of the Triarchs without invitation. Jon rested his hand on Longclaw's hilt, hesitant. Giving up his sword felt like stepping into a dragon's maw unarmed. But if he refused, blood would spill. With a heavy sigh, he unbuckled the belt and set the sword aside, nodding for his men to do the same. The mercenaries smirked, collecting the weapons. One even dared to run his thumb along the hilt of Longclaw as if appraising its value. Jon's anger flared, but he held it in check. They were marched out of the temple and through winding streets at sword point. Curious onlookers peered from balconies and doorways. Jon ground his teeth in frustration. Had the triumvirate grown nervous that he might seek allies among the old loyalists to Daenerys? Or was this some other power play? The city's tension pressed on him like a heavy cloak, damp with sweat. They trudged up the pyramid steps again, the blazing afternoon sun scorching their shoulders. The same grand hall awaited, though the seats were more sparsely occupied. Triarch Shallah stood near the dais, her arms crossed over her scaled armor. She regarded Jon with thinly veiled contempt. We told you to keep your men on ships unless invited. We told you to cause no trouble. Jon lifted his head. I visited a temple, not a fortress. Since when is that trouble? Shalah's nostrils fell. Ard, you speak to the former priests who cling to fantasies of the Dragon Queen. You openly ask about dragons, stirring old sentiments among the freedmen. That is trouble. Jon realized she likely feared an uprising, a spark that might dethrone the triumvirate if the city rallied around Daenerys's memory. I had no intention of inciting rebellion. Mocker strolled in from a side chamber, gold nose ring gleaming. Yet you do so all the same. Some of our citizens still idolize Daenerys Targaryen. If they think a new champion from Westeros has come to restore her legacy, they might rise against us. Jon kept his tone level. I'm here on behalf of King Bran. I make no claim on Meereen. Perhaps, Shallah said, stepping closer, voice cold. But you'll remain under watch until you leave. We can't have you whispering in the dark corners of our city. Jon's anger flared despite himself. You granted us permission to stay and inquire about the dragon. This is part of that inquiry. She glowered, tension crackling in the air. The scarred Triarch Orys entered behind her, arms folded. We have a delicate balance here, Westerosi. We won't let you undermine it for your own gain. Surrender your weapons, those your men carry on the streets, and confine yourselves to the harbor district. Or you can leave Meereen altogether. Which will it be? Jon realized they were in no position to fight every mercenary in Meereen. If a real lead on Drogon existed here, they needed time to find it. We'll comply, he said, voice tight. We'll remain in the harbor district until we're ready to depart. But let me warn you, if your men harm any of mine, we'll defend ourselves. Shalah's eyes flashed. Do not threaten us in our own city. Davos stepped in with a quick bow, trying to smooth matters. No threats, my lady. Merely caution. We want no further trouble, just safe passage and perhaps guidance about the dragon. If we cannot have that, we'll move on. Perhaps we'll try Astapor or Yukai. The Triarchs conferred in low voices. At length, Mocker waved a dismissive hand. Fine. Stay in the harbor. Trade, rest, do what you will quietly. And keep your men under control. If we see them straying again, you'll be expelled by force. Is that understood? Jon forced himself to nod. Understood. They were escorted out once more, the mercenaries returning their swords at the base of the pyramid with a show of reluctance. Jon's companions muttered curses as they walked away. Tormund would likely have been raging had he been there. Jon felt a roiling frustration in the pit of his stomach. Time was slipping through their fingers and the triumvirate seemed determined to stifle any serious investigation. Could Drogon be near Meereen and these mercenaries simply wanted to exploit or kill the dragon themselves? Back at the docks, Tormund was waiting with a scowl. Heard you got yourselves hauled up the pyramid. We're watched like hawks now. The triumvirate posted guards along the quays. No one can go more than a few blocks inland without a tail. Jon nodded grimly. We might have to leave Meereen soon if we can't find any leads. The old temple caretaker confirmed nothing we don't already suspect. Drogon roams. No one can say where. Davos sighed, leaning on a crate. If the triumvirate is so nervous, maybe that's a sign Drogon was sighted here more recently than they admit. They must fear the city's reaction. Jon looked over the harbor at the glimmer of gold on the water's surface as the sun lowered. We'll give it a day or two. Talk discreetly to the sailors from other ports. If we find no concrete lead, we sail to the Dothraki Sea. Many of the Dothraki revered Daenerys once. Perhaps they've seen the dragon. Evening settled, lamps and torches lit along the waterfront. The oppressive heat lingered, though a mild breeze offered slight relief. The smell of spiced fish and roasting peppers wafted through the air. Jon caught glimpses of men from his ships wandering about, guarded by triumvirate soldiers at a distance. The atmosphere was strained as if a single spark could ignite chaos. Trying to clear his head, Jon walked along a narrow wharf near the edge of the harbor. The water slapped gently against the pilings, reflecting pinpricks of orange torchlight. He thought again of Daenerys, the day she flew away from the fighting pit on Drogon's back, wounded but defiant. If only that moment had been the end of her trials. He could almost see her now, silver hair trailing in the wind, eyes alight with fierce determination. A voice from the shadows startled him. Do you truly seek her legacy? Jon whirled, hand on longclaw. A hooded figure stood at the corner of the wharf, face obscured. The voice was soft, perhaps a woman's. She took a slow step forward, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Jon's pulse quickened. Who are you? The figure lifted a small medallion. A three-headed dragon sigil. It glinted in the torchlight. Someone who remembers our queen's final command before she left Meereen. I was one of her handmaidens, though only briefly. My mother served in her entourage. We saw the Freedmen's Council undone by these mercenaries. But not all have forgotten. Jon let go of his sword, heart-pounding. If you served Daenerys, then tell me what you know of Drogon. Please. It could save lives. She pulled the hood back slightly, revealing dark hair and a thin face marred by a faint scar on her cheek. The triumvirate lies. Drogon came here 3 moons ago, flying at night. He perched on the old Great Pyramid, roaring like thunder. Many cowered, but some believed Daenerys had returned. The mercenaries fired scorpions at him, driving him away. He set fire to a watchtower and vanished into the night. Since then, the triumvirate punishes anyone who speaks openly of the event. They fear the people will rise, hoping for another Targaryen savior. Jon's mouth went dry. 3 moons ago? That's recent. Do you know where Drogon went afterwards? She shook her head. Some said he flew east, toward the red wastes beyond Laser. Others swear they saw him circle the city for days before heading south. If you want the truth, speak to the shepherds beyond the walls. They watch the skies, and they know when something big passes overhead. Jon grimaced. We can't reach them freely. The triumvirate monitors our movements. Her eyes glinted with conviction. I can guide you past their patrols if you come alone. But we must do it soon. The triumvirate hunts anyone who dares to speak of the dragon. Jon's thoughts whirled. This might be their best chance at real information, but it was risky. If the mercenaries caught him sneaking out, Meereen would become a battleground. Yet the opportunity to confirm Drogon's flight path was too important to ignore. All right, he said, voice hushed. Let me gather 2 of my men, no more. We'll meet you here when the moon is high. She hesitated, then nodded. Bring no more, or I won't appear. We cannot risk drawing attention. Before he could say another word, she slipped away into the darkness with the grace of a shadow. Jon stood there, heart pounding, mind racing. Finally, a tangible lead. But the danger was immense. If the triumvirate discovered him leaving, they might seize his ships, or worse. He returned to his vessel and found Tormund sipping watered wine by a lantern. You look like a man who just got visited by a ghost, Tormund said, eyes narrowing. Jon told him in a low voice about the hooded woman's revelation. Davos, overhearing, set down a scroll he was examining. Sneaking out of the city under watch? You realize the risk? Jon nodded. We have to. This is the closest we've come to a real clue. Drogon was here, not long ago. If the shepherds can confirm where he flew, we might pick up his trail. Tormund grinned, though the expression was tense. I'll come with you. I'm good at sneaking. He laughed quietly. At least better than I was at that Southron dinner you made me attend. Jon managed a slight smile. I'll also bring one other, someone light on their feet. But Davos, you stay here. If we don't return by dawn, assume we've been captured and do what you must. Davos grimaced, fingers drumming on the tabletop. I don't like it, but you're right. We can't pass this up. He exhaled slowly. Gods be good. Be careful. When the moon rose high over Meereen's walls, Jon and Tormund, accompanied by a wiry free folk scout named RYK, slipped off the ship. They wore dark clothes, carrying minimal gear. Avoiding the main thoroughfares, they crept between piles of crates and fishing nets until they reached the wharf's far end. There, by the faint glow of starlight, stood the hooded woman. She motioned silently for them to follow. She led them through a labyrinth of back alleys, at times pausing to let triumvirate patrols pass. Jon's heart hammered each time he saw the silhouette of a mercenary spear or heard the clank of armor. Once, they had to press themselves against a crumbling wall as two soldiers trudged by, muttering complaints about the night watch. When the coast was clear, they continued, eventually emerging near the city's eastern gate. Two board guards stood watch on the walls above. The hooded woman signaled for them to crouch behind an abandoned millhouse. She slipped away, returning with a rope coiled around her shoulder. She pointed to a section of the city wall that had partially collapsed in past conflicts, offering a crumbling ledge about halfway up. We climb here, then cross to the outside. There's a drainage ditch leading away from the moat. Stay quiet. Tormund whispered to Jon, when I said I was better at sneaking, I didn't imagine climbing city walls in the dead of night. My bones aren't as nimble as they used to be. Jon shot him a faint grin. Quiet, or you'll be sneaking in a prison cell soon. They scaled the rough stone carefully, biting back curses whenever a foothold gave way. The hooded woman climbed with surprising skill, setting the rope in place for them to follow. At the top, they inched along the ledge behind a broken parapet. The guard tower lay a short distance away, lamplight revealing only the shapes of the inattentive sentries. Once they reached the far side, the woman dropped the rope to the outside and they clambered down into a patch of scrubby brush. Beyond Meereen's walls, the land stretched in rolling fields that eventually gave way to rocky hills. The smell of open air, tinged with dust and sparse vegetation, filled Jon's nostrils, far more pleasant than the city's stifling stench. The woman led them across a shallow ditch, then onto a faint path that curved around a cluster of low houses. Some goats bleated softly nearby. She pressed a finger to her lips, and they moved cautiously, listening for the howls of any watchdogs. Soon they reached a small farmstead, a mud brick hut with a thatched roof. Smoke curled from a hole in the roof, indicating someone inside. The woman rapped softly on the wooden door. A moment later, it creaked open, revealing an elderly shepherd with a staff. He squinted at the strangers, brandishing the staff in alarm. She raised her hands. Peace. We mean you no harm, uncle. These men come from afar to ask about the black beast in the sky. The shepherd's eyes flicked to Jon and Tormund. Don't bring trouble here, he hissed. It was enough that our flocks got burned. I don't want the mercenaries breathing down our necks. Jon stepped forward, speaking softly. We only want to know when it was last seen, and which direction it flew. Then we'll leave you in peace. The shepherd's features twisted with anxiety, but at a nod from the hooded woman, he relented. It was maybe 2.5 moons ago. Late at night, I heard the goats bleating in terror. When I ran out, I saw fire in the sky, a black shape, wings bigger than my fields. It swooped down, snatched 3 of my goats in its claws, and flew off. The next morning, the ground still smoldered where its fire scorched the earth. Tormund exhaled sharply. So it was Drogon, no doubt. Jon pressed on. Which direction did it go? The shepherd gestured east, beyond the hills. Over that ridge, heading toward the red wastelands. A horseman from Laser who passed by a few days later said there were rumors of a black monster harrying caravans on the old route to V's Dothrak. Jon's pulse quickened. So, Drogon might be hunting along the route to the Dothraki Sea? Aye, or beyond. None can say for sure. But if you go that way, be wary. Raiders roam those lands, and the Dothraki Khalasars do as they please. Jon bowed his head in gratitude. Thank you. I promise we won't linger. You've done a great service. The shepherd simply grunted. The hooded woman turned to Jon. Now you know. Drogon has been feeding here. If you truly seek him, follow the laser road. Jon nodded, determination burning inside him. We will. But why do you help us? She lowered her gaze. Because she believed in breaking chains. I saw her free thousands, restore dignity. This city forgot too quickly, but some of us did not. If Drogon still carries her memory, let him know she was loved. Please. Jon felt a pang. Thank you, he said quietly. I'll do what I can. They left the shepherd in peace, retracing their steps with the hooded woman leading. Climbing back over the wall proved more harrowing as the guards were slightly more alert, but they managed it. At the wharf, before slipping away, she whispered, "Go soon. The triumvirate already suspects you. If they discover this, they'll tighten their grip." Then she vanished into the darkness, leaving Jon, Tormund, and Ryk alone on the deserted pier. When they returned to the ship, dawn was just starting to glow on the horizon. Davos, who had waited anxiously all night, met them at the gangplank. "Well," he demanded, face tight with worry. "Any luck?" Jon shared the shepherd's account. "Drogon last seen heading toward Laser, possibly the Dothraki Sea. We have a direction now." Davos glanced at the city's silhouette, clouds tinted pink and gold. "Then we should leave before the triumvirate realizes you slipped out. I'll gather the captains." The entire fleet sprang into frantic motion. They loaded supplies, recalled any men still ashore, and prepared to cast off. A few triumvirate guards noticed the sudden activity, but Davos slipped them a plausible explanation. The Westerosi were simply heading upriver to search for trade. With bribes still fresh in their pockets, the mercenaries grumbled but didn't stop them. By the time the sun fully rose, the sails were up and Jon's ships glided away from Meereen's harbor like ghosts departing a haunted shore. Looking back at the city, Jon felt a swirl of relief and regret. Daenerys had tried so hard to free Meereen, to give it a new life. Now it languished under mercenary rule. But at least some remembered her compassion. He turned his gaze forward toward the open waters to the east. Past the Valyrian Peninsula lay uncharted dangers, and beyond that the vast grass seas of the Dothraki. As the morning light spilled across the decks, Tormund clapped him on the shoulder. "We have a direction now, Snow. Time to see if your black dragon still roams the sky." Jon nodded, jaw set. "We'll chase him to the ends of the earth if we must." Yara ordered the battered ships to angle southeast, following the coastline until they could round the Bay of Dragons and potentially head inland through a river route or a shallow estuary that led toward Laser. Davos had heard rumors of a navigable stretch that could bring them closer to the interior, though charts were outdated. On the prow, Jon let the wind whip at his hair, feeling the hint of renewed purpose. Drogon was real, alive, and hunting. The triumvirate might want him dead, others might want to harness his power. But Jon intended a different path, one that might honor what Daenerys once fought for and spare Westeros a potential cataclysm of fire. The day wore on, the sails billowed, and Meereen became a distant memory on the horizon. Seagulls circled overhead and the men lounged in cautious optimism. But Jon's mind was far from easy. Each time he closed his eyes, he imagined the thunderous roar of dragon wings, the wash of heat from black flames. Would Drogon even allow Jon close enough to speak the old Valyrian commands? Or would he see only the man who took Daenerys from him? Night fell in a blanket of stars, the wind carrying them steadily along the coast. Tormund pointed out a constellation he claimed was shaped like a giant's beard, though no one else could see it. Davos studied an ancient chart by lantern light, muttering about unreliable references to half-silted rivers. Yara's sailors kept watch for hidden reefs. In the hush of evening, the gentle sound of water lapping against the hull lulled some to sleep, but not Jon. He stood near the prow, hands resting on the railing, eyes scanning the dark horizon. He felt a presence behind him, Davos, approaching quietly. "You should sleep," the older knight said. "You'll drive yourself mad with worry." Jon managed a thin smile. Sleep rarely comes easy these days. Not with so much at stake. Davos sighed, joining him at the rail. "You carry a heavyweight, lad. Reminds me of Stannis, except you do it for the realm, not just for your claim. Maybe that's why people trust you. You don't want power for its own sake." Jon stared at the faint silver of moonlight on the water. "I never wanted power. Only to do what's right. That's why we're here," Davos said softly. "Remember that when we face the dragon, we're here to spare Westeros another war, another wave of destruction. And maybe, in some small way, to honor Daenerys' better angels." Jon swallowed hard. "I hope we can succeed." They remained there in companionable silence, the wind fluttering the sails overhead, the ship rocking gently. Far across the sea, thunder rumbled, perhaps another distant storm. Jon wondered if Drogon soared within that storm front, black wings silhouetted by lightning, raging in his solitude. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Within a few days, they reached the mouth of a wide river that snaked inland toward Laser. The region was arid, dotted with scrubby vegetation, but the river's banks were green and lush. The water glimmered under the scorching sun, reflecting a sky of unbroken azure. Davos oversaw the ship's approach, cautioning that the current might be treacherous. Jon decided to take only 4 ships up the river, his own flagship, one of Yara's airborne vessels, and 2 smaller Manderley ships capable of shallow drafting. The remaining vessels would anchor at the delta, awaiting their return. Navigating upriver was a challenge, the current tugging at their keels. Crewmen used long poles to guide them around sandbars, and the progress was slow. Tormund grumbled, preferring to ride a horse if they had one, but horses were scarce in their party. The banks teemed with reeds and small crocodiles that basked in the sun, slipping into the water at the ship's passage. Occasionally, they spotted a cluster of mud-brick settlements or farmland, the locals gaping at the foreigners from a safe distance. One afternoon, the watchman shouted a warning, "Riders on the east bank." Jon scrambled to the rail, squinting. A group of 12 men on horseback emerged from a dusty trail, each armed with bows and curved swords. From their dress, loose trousers, leather vests, they could be Dothraki or perhaps local Lazarene tribesmen. Jon quickly raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture, beckoning them to parley. The riders hesitated, then slowly approached Ye Water's Edge. They watched warily, bows half-drawn. Jon called out, "We come in peace. We seek news of a black dragon." The riders exchanged glances. One of them urged his horse forward, face partially hidden by a cloth. He spoke in halting Valyrian, which Davos attempted to translate. "They say they have seen the black beast in the sky, far to the east, near the burned fields. They warn us it is death from above." Jon's heart thudded. "Ask them when it was last seen." Davos relayed the question. The rider replied with a gesture indicating around a week's ride eastward. The dragon had attacked a small caravan, burning wagons and carrying off livestock. Then it vanished into the horizon. Jon thanked them and offered a small pouch of coin. The riders took it with suspicious eyes, then galloped away. This confirmed Drogon was indeed roaming deeper inland. They continued upriver for another day until the water grew too shallow for the larger ships to proceed. Jon anchored them near a bend where the reeds formed a natural barrier. After conferring with Davos, they decided to disembark and travel on foot. They had a handful of pack mules aboard plus some improvised carts. Yara refused to leave her ship, stating she was no Dothraki donkey. Tormund was eager for solid ground. Davos considered staying with the ships to maintain order, so Jon asked him to do just that. He would lead a scouting party inland to track Drogon's whereabouts. The next morning, a group of around 30 men set off Tormund, several free folk including Ryk, half a dozen Northman knights, and a handful of Ironborn who, surprisingly, wanted to see a dragon up close. They carried spears, crossbows, provisions, and waterskins. The sun beat down on them relentlessly. The land was largely flat, dotted with coarse grass, low shrubs, and the occasional rocky outcrop. They followed a dirt track that curved east, passing small hamlets whose residents either fled or watched fearfully from afar. Jon tried not to appear threatening, but a band of armed foreigners always drew suspicion. At night, they made camp by whatever meager water source they could find, a half-dry stream or a small pond. They took turns standing watch. Tormund entertained them with tall tales of bears the size of mammoths or the time he claimed to have shared a sleeping bag with a she-giant for warmth. The Northmen sometimes laughed, though tension simmered beneath their camaraderie. Everyone knew they hunted a creature that could easily roast them in seconds. After 3 days of trudging under the merciless sun, they reached a region where the grass turned to scorched earth. Blackened patches stretched for miles, the ground cracked and lifeless. The air smelled faintly of old ash. Here and there, half-burned wagons or animal bones littered the area. Tormund squatted by a charred rib cage. Dragon fire did this? Jon knelt. It seems so. These bones look melted on one side. Drogon was here, all right. They pressed on, scanning the skies at every step. The heat shimmered across the plain, playing tricks on the eyes. Once a shape passed in front of the sun, making them jerk to attention. But it was only a large vulture. Twice, they stumbled on fresh scorch marks in the soil. Each time, Jon's pulse hammered, expecting to find the dragon in midfeast. But Drogon was elusive. Some in the party began whispering that this was madness. They had only crossbows and spears. How would they even confront the beast if they found it? On the 5th evening, they made camp at the foot of a rocky outcrop near a dried-up riverbed. A relentless wind scoured the land, stinging their eyes with dust. They huddled behind boulders for shelter, building a small fire that flickered in the gusts. Jon volunteered for first watch, ascending a slight rise to scan the horizon as the sun dipped below it, painting the west in orange and pink. He stared east into the deepening twilight, recalling the hooded woman's plea. If Drogon still carries her memory, let him know she was loved. Jon didn't know if dragons comprehended such sentiments, but perhaps they felt grief. Drogon's howls on the day Daenerys died had sounded so mournful. He could still hear them echoing in his nightmares. If he confronted the dragon, would it sense he was responsible? Or would it remember that once he rode alongside its siblings into battle against the dead? A sudden flicker of movement caught his eye. A silhouette in the sky, large and swooping low against the darkening horizon. His heart slammed against his ribs. He rose to his feet, half expecting it to be another vulture or a trick of the fading light. But then he heard it. A distant roar, deeper and more resonant than any earthly beast. The shape glided closer, wings outstretched. A black outline against the faint glow of dusk, massive and unmistakable, Drogon. Jon froze, adrenaline surging. He waved frantically at the camp below, calling out, "Dragon! Dragon in the sky!" The men scrambled for weapons. Tormund cursed, grabbing a crossbow. But Drogon soared overhead, a colossal form that blotted out the stars. Jon's hair whipped in the gust of the creature's passing. A wave of heat washed over him as the dragon bellowed, flames licking at the night. In an instant, the campsite erupted in chaos. Some men dove for cover behind rocks. Others aimed crossbows at the beast overhead, though they had little chance of hitting a moving target in the dark. Drogon swooped lower, unleashing a spurt of flame that scorched the ground near the fire pit, sending sparks and embers flying. One of the mules screeched and bolted into the darkness. Jon felt every instinct screaming to duck, to hide, but he forced himself to stand up, arms raised. "Drogon!" he shouted, voice cracking with urgency. "Drogon! Dracarys, no, wait, wait!" He realized he was yelling nonsense, half commanding, half pleading. The dragon banked sharply, circling back for another pass. Jon caught a glimpse of its obsidian scales reflecting the starlight, its eyes glowing red as embers. Tormund seized Jon's arm. "Get down, you fool. It'll roast you." Jon shook his head, voice hoarse. "We have to show it we're not enemies." "Don't shoot," he bellowed at the archers. "Hold your fire." A handful of men, terrified, let bolts fly anyway, but the bolts fell short or glanced off Drogon's armored scales with harmless sparks. The dragon roared, furious, smoke billowing from its nostrils. It descended in a rush of beating wings, landing with an earth-shaking thud about 50 yards away, scattering dust. Its enormous head snaked forward, jaws parted in a snarl that revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. The stench of sulfur and burnt flesh wafted through the air. Jon raised his hands higher, stepping forward, heart pounding so loud it filled his ears. He felt Tormund behind him but didn't dare look back. "Drogon," he said again, struggling to keep his voice steady. "You remember me?" His words felt pitifully small in the face of such raw power. The dragon let out a low rumble like distant thunder and took a step, talons gouging the earth. Its tail lashed, stirring up more dust. Jon felt the heat radiating from its scaled body, the force of each breath. He recalled the times he had touched Rhaegal's flank, the wonder of flight above the clouds. But Drogon was bigger, fiercer, a living weapon. Somewhere behind Jon, a man screamed in panic and fired another crossbow bolt. It zipped past Drogon's flank, harmless, but the dragon's head snapped toward that movement. A guttural roar tore through the night, and Drogon expelled a torrent of flame that engulfed the offending archer in an instant, lighting up the darkness with horrifying brilliance. The man's scream cut off abruptly, replaced by the sickening crackle of fire. Shouts erupted. Men scattered in all directions, some returning fire out of sheer terror. Jon bellowed for them to stop, but fear had taken hold. Drogon roared again, flapping its wings menacingly, stirring a gale of dust and sparks. Another spout of flame swept across the campsite, forcing men to dive behind boulders. Jon coughed in the smoke, eyes stinging with tears. He could see Tormund dragging a wounded Ironborn aside, cursing every inch of the way. Jon staggered forward, waving his arms to draw Drogon's attention away from the others. "Drogon!" he shouted, voice cracking with desperation. "Easy, boy. Easy." He tried to remember the high Valyrian words Daenerys had once used, but they stumbled on his tongue. "Likiri, Drogon. Likiri." The dragon's gaze snapped to Jon, its eyes seeming to burn with a savage intelligence. It let out a bone-rattling hiss, smoke curling from its maw. Jon's mind reeled, memories flooding back, Daenerys stroking Drogon's head, calming him with soft words. If only she were here. He took another step closer, arms still raised, ignoring the voice in his head that screamed to run. For a moment, Drogon simply stared, a massive sentinel of living flame. Jon could almost feel the tension in the night air, the coil of lethal power ready to strike. Then, with a growl that resonated in Jon's chest, Drogon spread its wings in a single motion, launching skyward in a storm of dust. The force of the downdraft flung Jon backward, and he crashed hard onto the ground. Through the haze, he saw the dragon ascending, scorching the sky with one final plume of fire before vanishing into the darkness. Coughing, ears ringing, Jon pushed himself to his knees. His arms shook and his head spun. He heard distant shouts, moans of the injured, the crackle of small fires. Tormund rushed over, helping Jon up. "Gods, are you alive?" Tormund panted, eyes wide with alarm. Jon's voice rasped. "Aye, yes. Where are the others?" Tormund jerked his head. "We lost at least 3 men to the flames. A couple more wounded. The rest are shaken. We tried to hold fire, but panic took over." Jon swallowed bile as he glanced at the smoldering remains of the archer. "The men, did we do this? Or was this inevitable?" Tormund shook his head. "Who can say? It's a dragon. A flick of its tail can kill us. You risked your life stepping forward like that." Jon coughed out a bitter laugh. "I had to try. If we can't communicate with it, we'll never stand a chance." They spent the rest of the night tending to the injured and stamping out flames. Some demanded they abandon the mission, insisting the dragon was unstoppable. Others gritted their teeth, their fear smoldering into rage. By dawn, they had lost 4 men total, and a half-dozen more bore burns or scrapes. Morale hung by a thread. Jon paced the camp, mind reeling. Drogon was alive and lethal, but perhaps there had been a moment, however brief, when he seemed to recognize Jon before panic and crossbow bolts shattered any hope of peace. They couldn't force a bond with the dragon using the same brute methods these men might have used in a normal hunt. They needed a different approach. But how and at what cost? As the first rays of sunlight lit the scorched plain, Jon faced Tormund and the survivors. "We can't chase Drogon blindly," he said, voice ragged. "We'll regroup. Build a safer campsite near water. Tend the wounded. Then I'll decide our next move." Tormund's gaze was sympathetic. "It's not just your move, Jon. We're all in this together." Jon nodded, exhaustion pulling at every limb. "I know." He remembered Bran's words. This was a burden he couldn't bear alone. Yet he felt the weight of it crushing him. Above all, he felt the echo of Daenerys' presence in the thunder of Drogon's roar. The realm's future might hinge on what happened next, peace or cataclysm. But as dawn broke over the devastated plain, Jon wondered if he had any real power to shape that outcome, or if they were all just leaves in a dragon's storm. They packed what remained of their supplies and began moving cautiously toward a distant copse of trees, hoping for a small respite and shade. The sky remained ominously empty of black wings, but every gust of wind made them jump. Jon looked east, heart pounding with unanswered questions. Drogon was out there, wounded perhaps by crossbow bolts or enraged. If they found him again, would he attack on sight? Or was there a chance, however small, that Jon could evoke the memory of Daenerys and forge a truce? One step at a time, Jon told himself. Reunite the realm with dragons and free folk together, those were Bran's words. But no one said it would be easy or that the dragon would consent. Perhaps the realm's destiny lay not in taming a beast of fire, but in accepting that some forces could never be fully controlled. Still, he would try, for Daenerys' memory, for the living, and for a future that did not quake under the shadow of unstoppable violence. As they trudged onward under the searing sun, Jon silently prayed to the old gods and knew that he might find the wisdom to face the dragon once more, and that Drogon, in turn, might somehow remember the gentler hand that once fed him.